There we go. We should be live now. Hi, everyone. Every time, my camera always loves to just stop focusing on me. I know I'm ugly, Logitech, but jeez.
There was a Woody Allen movie years ago. I forgot what it's called. And it was one of the short stories in the movie. And in the story, the camera couldn't focus on the person. And it was like, it had something to do with the personalities and stuff like that.
Hello, everybody.
Can't talk about Woody Allen anymore.
Oh. But there's I have a really stupid issue on my version of Windows 10 right now. All of the thumbnail previews in File Explorer and in Search and just anywhere just don't work anymore. I just don't have thumbnail previews. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, that is annoying.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Excellent.
Oh.
Testing 1, 2, 3. How are mine and Dan's audio levels? We should be about even. I'm getting good at this. 2, 3. How many years in? 3 years in?
Stop counting.
Episode 188. Okay, we should be good to go. I'm ready when you are.
I am now recording.
I am now recording as well.
3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Windows Central Podcast, episode 188 for July 24th, 2020. Hey everyone, Dean Rubino here, joined by Zach Bowden for another exciting episode of the Windows Central Podcast, where we talk about all things Microsoft and Surface and Xbox and what other cool tech stuff has happened during the week. And this week we have quite a lot to get through, including Microsoft's Q4 financials. Oh my God, I almost fell asleep. But we'll just go through it quickly. But it was a good quarter for Microsoft. Probably no surprise, but we'll talk about what that means and go into some detail. Latest OS build. So there was a surprise beta release today, as well as there was a fast ring too. I think it came out. But and the fast ring had some interesting stuff in it, specifically for the Pro X, which we'll talk about. But perhaps some more exciting news is the beta build, which got some UI surprises in there, which is going to be pretty awesome. Surface Duo at FCC. Yes, it said Surface Duo. You can all get excited now because I know everybody loves talking about Surface Duo. Whether or not it's going to be an amazing device or a terrible device, I'm super excited about this device. I can't wait to get this thing because I'm just bored, I think, with everything else that's coming out. Should be kind of cool. We'll talk a little bit about that. Xbox Games Showcase. Microsoft showed off actual real footage of the games that are coming to Xbox One X, and perhaps this is a lesson of, you get what you ask for, at least when it comes to Halo. We'll talk about Microsoft Teams on ARM is finally happening and why I'm both excited and completely disappointed by this announcement, which wasn't even an announcement. And then finally, we're going to wrap it up with an interview with the one and only Mary Jo Foley, talking about cloud, Windows 10 X, and the future of Microsoft's operating system. Zach actually did that interview without me, so I have no idea what's said. Hopefully they don't say anything mean about me. But Zach, how are you doing on this fine Friday?
I'm not too bad. I'm feeling good this week. I don't know why. I think a lot of it just positive, interesting stuff happened in the world of Microsoft, which, I think it's been quite slow on the news front these last few weeks / months. But things seem to be picking up in July, which I'm super excited about.
Yeah, it's been an all right week.
Dan, I never expect you to be more than meh in anything.
I really, my whole existence is meh. I'm pretty positive. Like, there's this idea of live fast, die young, burn the candle at both ends. Like, I'm pretty positive I'm going to live to 104, and my entire life will be summed up as
Just on your gravestone, meh.
Yeah, it's just it was fine. I came, I lived, I breathed, got to reproduce.
I guess it was all right.
I guess it was all right. Can't complain. That's just the way I am. When you have someone like Kanye West, and I don't want to make fun of he's reportedly diagnosed as bipolar, and it's clearly he's got obvious issues that need to be taken care of. was experienced on Twitter. I just want to highlight, I'm like the exact opposite of Kanye West, which is like where he goes to these like manic episodes. I'll never be like that. I'm still impressed with I'd never had to delete a tweet or apologize for something I've ever said. I'm just too level-headed, I think.
Dan is a professional online, so much so that Twitter locks him out of his account a lot.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I am back on Twitter. If you tune into last week's podcast, we had an extensive discussion regarding the Twitter hack that happened. And there's been some fallout from that this week, some talk about it. But yeah, right after that podcast was nice. Twitter did allow me back into my account as I was one of the ones who were locked out due to security concerns. So actually, speaking of real quickly, as before we go into the news, Twitter is reportedly now toying with the idea finally of offering a subscription type service, which to me is always like, I mean, it's optional. So, before everybody freaks out, this is going to be like this idea that it's a value add. In other words, if you use Twitter a lot and you do this subscription thing, you'll get extra features, including like, less ads, which, for some people, the ads on Twitter really bother them. Other people, it's not a big deal, but, presumably you get less of that, but also some added features. Now, unfortunately, this hasn't been like fleshed out. We don't know what any of that means or what it will cost and all that kind of stuff. But it's just that Twitter apparently has a team together who are kind of experimenting with this and are toying with it. Part of that's because of the decline in ad revenue, which everybody's kind of seen online. I'm actually excited about that. I think Twitter, I'm a big fan of value add subscriptions. I know we do have a lot of subscriptions in life. Microsoft is known to do that now with Game Pass and Microsoft 365 and Office 365. But it's also clear it works. Like Peacock launched last week for NBC, and I'm doing a trial for that, which is actually kind of cool because they do have Brave New World, which is kind of nice. There's actually a really good BBC. I'm going off on a tangent. Maybe I am like Kanye. There's a really good BBC show called The Capture, which is airing on Peacock on NBC. You do need to do the trial they let you watch the first episode for free. Then you got to do the trial to watch the rest. But it's a really good, almost Jason Bourne type show that deals a lot with deep fakes and video and espionage, all this kind of stuff. And it's, I know for a lot of our audience, if you're listening to tech, go check that out. But anyway, back to my point. I think subscriptions are cool. Long as it's not a lockout feature, right? Like I don't think you should pay to have to use Twitter. But I think it's okay to add more features. And if you want to pay for them, you can optionally. So let's go into some of the other news. Speaking of money, Microsoft's Q4 financials. So I'll talk about this since I know Zach doesn't care.
Yeah. Did Microsoft make money?
They did make money. Okay. So specifically $38 billion in revenue. And all this is relative. I always talk about, okay, $38 billion is a lot of money, but the important thing to take into account here is what did Microsoft expect to make for this quarter, which was predicted last quarter, and what were analysts expecting? So analysts were predicting around $36.5 billion. Microsoft came in at 38. And that's what you want. I told you, before on stock market stuff, this is what investors look for. Two things. You either meet expectations or you beat them. Beat them is obviously better. But if you even meet your predictions and expectations, that's a good thing too. What's always bad is if you're like, we're going to make 38 billion and you come in at 34 billion. That's devastating. But Microsoft now has sort of a history of beating expectations on Wall Street. And those expectations are done by analysts who are looking at the market, looking at Microsoft's numbers and making their own judgment besides what Microsoft themselves are predicting. So anytime Microsoft beats those numbers, it's actually very good for them. So yeah, 38 billion for Q4 versus 36.5, which was predicted. And they saw basically growth all around. I think the big story was Surface. Well, actually Xbox. Xbox did very well. Including, of course, their console sales, but getting back to that Game Pass and subscription stuff, they're seeing so much adoption and usage of it. It goes to show you that really is sort of the secret weapon Microsoft has. And we'll loop back to that when we talk about the Xbox Game Showcase, because Game Pass is so critical to that whole story. But besides the Xbox news, Surface did well. Got the 1.74 billion. Compared to the same time last year, they did 1.34 billion.
Do you think this is pandemic related? People buying PCs for home?
Microsoft does. They explained that, as well as sales of OEM licenses for non-Pro Windows 10. That is Windows 10 Home. That's the consumer version, whereas up like 34%. And they attribute this to the fact that basically people had to buy computers and they needed, and Microsoft was there. We have our own detractors and comments. They are just like they're resident. I don't want to call them trolls necessarily, but anytime there's like good news for Microsoft, they're going to find a way to spin it negatively. And so people were actually like, yeah, but people only felt like they had to buy this stuff, not because they wanted to. And all I'm thinking is like that is probably true. It's completely irrelevant. Every company in the world who sells something strives to reach this ability to have a product that the world needs.
Yeah.
You have to buy it. Like you just need it. Versus, because every ad is out there trying to convince you why you need something. But very few products are things you actually really need. And so, Microsoft and Windows 10 and it's in the PC business has become essential. No different than, I don't know, buying a car for a lot of people, at least in the United States, is very essential. You kind of need a car if you want to work. It makes life easier. Insurance is a big thing. Going and paying for college is a big thing. A refrigerator. I've recently came into a position of a house. I can tell you, resealing my driveway, buying a lawnmower are not things I'm excited about buying. I can't, yes, finally, I've waited 40 years to buy a lawnmower. But it doesn't mean like the companies that make the lawnmower, they care. They're like, yeah, you need to buy a lawnmower. Sorry. So I think this is a good thing for Microsoft, but it really does show that what makes this interesting, besides the financials, and if you've ever invested in Microsoft, is the fact that, a couple months ago, Panos Panay said, we're pausing Windows 10X for dual screens, and we're only put it on single screens first. And the reason is because the world's changed. We're also doubling down on Windows 10 itself again. We're going to do some innovation around there. And I think there was a lot of like, kind of a little bit of eye rolling from our audience. Like, what does that really mean? And sharing all this. But when you see the numbers this week, it actually makes sense now. It's like clearly Microsoft did see a massive uptick in OEM revenue for Windows 10 and Surface sales due to this global change in pandemic. Now, some of this will go back to quote unquote normal. Who knows, in a month, 6 months, 8 months. But they're betting on, and I think it's correct because most analysts say this, the world has significantly changed. Microsoft was always going down this path. Technology itself was always going down this path of remote and collaborative work. I mean, Teams came out in 2016. It's not new. But what's happened with this pandemic is it's put this like turbo onto the world where it was already going. It just sped it up dramatically by years. So now all of a sudden things like relying on the cloud for certain infrastructure needs or remote video conferencing. I mean, a story came out just today about the NBA, who struck a deal with Microsoft earlier this year. They're going to be using Microsoft Teams. So since they can't have audiences at these basketball games, they're going to have giant screens. And those screens are going to broadcast Microsoft Teams, specifically what do you call it? Their new feature where it's
together mode.
Yeah, together mode, where it's like it puts you into like a classroom or like with seats and stuff like that. And fans are going to be able to like apparently put themselves in there, and they're going to use that as the audience. Like, which is like all that is just because of the pandemic, right? But it goes to show you the innovation that's going on. So Microsoft is firing on all cylinders here. They expect another good quarter next quarter. I don't think they're expecting as big, but they do expect single-digit growth again for OEM and Surface and all that kind of stuff. So
as you mentioned, like this can't last forever, right? There's going to come a peak where this starts to decline and things return to normal. The question, of course, is when is that, and can Microsoft predict it ahead of time? Because if Microsoft can predict it, Wall Street and whatnot, they're usually not too bothered if you earn less than the last quarter or the year before, whatever, however it works. But if you predict wrongly and you come in substantially under, that's when they have an issue. Even if you made lots of money, even if you made 30 billion and you predicted 35 billion, Wall Street are like, this is bad. This is game over.
Yep. And a lot of it's quarterly. Like, for instance, Microsoft hit almost 2 billion in Surface sales for Q1, and that was for, I think it was Q1. That was from the holiday season, which you expect, right? So the fact that they didn't hit 2 billion again now makes sense because they weren't expected to. The big season will be the holiday season. It'll be interesting though, holiday 2020 to see Microsoft's numbers, which we won't get, of course, until like February of 2021. But it'll be interesting then to see, have they been able to sort of continue and build on that? But even then, with Surface sales, it is sort of like they're not trying to turn it into like this like $10 billion business. Microsoft will still say we're not a hardware company. We're putting that stuff out there to as a leader, but not necessarily. We still expect that HP, Dell, Lenovo, others to fill in those gaps and really to have the big sales. But yeah, good quarter for Microsoft. Teams is doing very well. Speaking of Teams, should mention Slack is not a fan of Teams.
I hate this story. I hate the story so much.
Slack has filed a complaint with the EU regarding Teams, and Slack has been, and listen, I understand a little bit of Slack. I mean, they were this small company, came out of kind of nowhere. They took existing technology like IRC chat and what was the one began with an H that they bought, I think. And they basically positioned for the workplace. We've been using Slack for a long time. As it was really crucial for our company in 2015, I think, when we started using it for basically this real-time remote collaboration. And that's only become a bigger deal. And I get it. They're a small company, independent, and then Microsoft steps in. And it's like 2016, and it's like, we're going to do this too. And apparently Microsoft wanted to buy Slack for $8 billion, and they said no. So Microsoft's all right, well, we'll just do our own thing. And there was a lot of like, Slack did a lot of chest thumping back then. They're like, welcome to the game, Microsoft. Yeah. Let's see what you got. They literally took out a full page ad in the New York Times, a letter to Microsoft. And it was just like a month ago, they basically said, we don't see Teams as a competitor to us because we do stuff different. And now they're going to the EU and saying Teams is not only a competitor, it's unfair. And maybe there is some unfairness in the sense that Microsoft is just a bigger company. And they were smart to tie in Teams to Office, make it all work together. And same with Skype. We've talked about hating on Skype a lot in this podcast, but Skype has really been sort of the fundamentals for building the video experience in Teams. And so it doesn't matter when people are like, no one uses Skype anymore. It's like, yeah, but everybody's using Teams, which is basically Skype. And so they've been able to cobble all of their technologies into Teams, and it's worked well for them. And I do feel bad for Slack in the sense that they're getting squeezed out of the Fortune 500 companies because those companies always have contracts with Microsoft. And if you already have a contract with Microsoft 365 and Office 365, you get Teams for free. You don't need to use it. You're not forced to use it, but it's just there if you want to. And that is an advantage. There's just no way around that. Whether it's illegal, I'm not sure. And that's something the EU, and to be fair, the EU has been more receptive to these types of arguments, to at least hear them, not necessarily rule in their favor. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
A lot of people are comparing this to the IE thing back in the day with Windows and Netscape and all of that. And I don't really see the comparison because Microsoft, like I'm pretty sure there are numbers when it comes to Microsoft Teams usage as part of Microsoft 365, and I don't think everybody who is subscribed to Microsoft 365 uses Microsoft Teams. I would bet less than half of Microsoft 365 subscribers actually use Microsoft Teams, which means most of those subscribers, those enterprises or businesses or whatever, are actually using something else or nothing at all. They might be still using email, you know.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
I think it's really stupid of Slack to be trying to push this narrative that, oh, it's unfair that Microsoft Teams is doing this. What Microsoft has done is release a service for air quotes free. It's not free, you're still paying for it because it's part of a subscription, but they didn't make the subscription cost more for it, right? It was just, by the way, if you pay for Microsoft 365, you now have this. Congratulations. You can use it if you want. You don't have to use it. I'm sure there's pop-ups that recommend you set it up and stuff, but you don't have to use it. It's not forced on. It doesn't force your organization to use it. It's just there if you want to do it. And some enterprises and businesses do take advantage of that, and others are sticking with Slack or doing whatever they're currently doing. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's unfair at all, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see the case that's being made. But it's clear that Slack is becoming a little bit desperate here to try to slow down Microsoft's growth. I mean, this Teams versus Slack thing has only become so, contentious because of the pandemic. Like you said, a lot of companies had Microsoft 365 and weren't using Teams. And then this pandemic happened, and Microsoft was like, you have this thing built in, just flip a switch, turn it on, and now you can work collaboratively remotely easily. And they've been very good at, building out features for Teams. You can almost say there's way more innovation happening in Teams right now than, say, Windows itself. And it makes sense because it's like Azure. They're just going where the money is, where the market is going. Like right now, regarding Teams, there's no such thing as too much innovation or making it too good. Like the better they make it better, the better they're going to see results, and customers are going to be happy and want to switch to it. The more they like this whole like together thing where they simulate, instead of separate video squares like what Google was using for a long time, and putting people into this like virtual room where you can squeeze more people in and also feels more natural. Like that kind of creativeness and ability to solve these problems of remote learning, remote working is amazing. And they're tying it into Azure cloud computing and machine learning and all this kind of stuff. Like that technology couldn't have been done years ago, but now it is. And Microsoft is just, they have more money, more talent, and more resources to throw at this than Slack does. And that doesn't mean, though, Slack is going to, like, our company uses Slack over Teams. Something Zach and I aren't happy about, but we don't have a choice because our company is so big, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. But Slack still has a lot of market. I think this is more about, like I said, Slack is not going to be able to get contracts with the Fortune 500, the really big companies. I mean, Microsoft was saying they have like customers now that have like 10 and 100,000, people using Teams within the company. It's crazy the numbers that they have. I don't know. So we'll have to watch to see what happens there. But it's.
And I mean, even if the EU agrees with Slack, and yes, it's unfair, and Microsoft has to make a change, Microsoft could easily get around this. Maybe they can't. I don't know how the law works, but if I were Microsoft, if it does come to it that the EU says yes, it's unfair, you've got to change this, you've got to unbundle Microsoft Teams from 365. If I were Microsoft, I'd just say, okay, Microsoft Teams is free now. And you just press, it's an add-on in the Microsoft 365 backend. You press add-on, then it adds it to your subscription. That's basically what I would change, right? Like, there's technically it's separate now and it's a free thing. You press one button and it's part of the subscription you already have. That's the change I would make. Unless Slack wants Microsoft to charge for Teams, which is like, what? That is a bad position to take during a pandemic, right? Oh, you should be charging for this service because it's unfair to us if you're not. Who cares about what people are stuck at home. Like, we're hiding from a virus. Let's just use the services we need to use. Like, I don't think Slack should go down this path.
Yeah, I don't disagree there. But oh well, Slack versus Teams. put a pin in it. I'm sure it'll be a big story in the next couple of months. Let's turn our attention to the latest builds of Windows 10. So there are two major releases this week. Fast Ring, which is not Fast Ring anymore. It's Dev, the Dev branch.
Get
and
it
then
right.
the new beta. Yeah, and the new beta channel. Zach, why don't you walk us through what's new with the Dev channel and then beta as well? And then I'll share some of my thoughts on this stuff.
Sure. So this week's dev channel build was 20175. Nothing crazy in it. Just some more improvements to Microsoft Edge and its pinned websites. I don't exactly understand this change. I think they're saying that with pinned apps, you'll now be able to see tabs inside that window or something. I don't exactly know what they're trying to improve it. I don't think I like this behavior. I like, if I pin a website as an app, I want that app to be the app. I don't want to see other tabs in Microsoft Edge when hovering over the icon on the taskbar. But apparently they're testing something along those lines now, so that's interesting. There's also a new PowerShell command for resetting Apex packages, which is fun. The biggest change I think a lot of people have been waiting for in this build is eye contact on Surface Pro X. Now, this is a feature Microsoft announced when the Surface Pro X was unveiled back in October. It's only just showing up in the dev channel, and I think it's part of the Surface app, which I guess you can get from the Microsoft Store. But what this does is, very subtly, when you want a call or something using the webcam, normally you look at the person on screen, which means to the person you're talking to, you're looking slightly down. What this does is just correct your eyes, so it looks like you're looking directly into the webcam, which I find creepy. I don't want that, but some people do, so that's in here now. A couple of new icons. There's a new snipping tool icon and an updated sticky notes icon as well, and a bunch more fixes. So like I said, nothing too huge in this build. And again, none of these features are scoped for any particular release. These are coming whenever Microsoft is ready to ship them, likely next year. And a notice for those running the current dev channel: if you're running build 2161 and below, the build you're running will expire on July 31st, so you do need to update before that date, otherwise your version windows will just stop working, and that's not fun. So make sure you update if you're running an older build in the dev channel, that is. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I know you tried
Wait. The Pro X?
Yeah, I mentioned it.
Okay.
I mentioned it. I was going to ask, what were your thoughts on this build, because I know you did install it on the Pro X.
Yeah, so I've been on the regular release for Pro X, and I was like, there's now a new feature I really want to try, which you mentioned, the eye thing, basically. And I want to talk a little bit about that for a second, because so the question a lot of people will have is, this is only for the SQ1 processor on Surface Pro X, not even ARM. Is it going to come to other devices that are Intel or AMD based? From what I understand, no. The Pro X has a special chip in it dedicated for this task, specifically AI. And it makes sense, because if you think about this, it's doing real-time video processing of adjusting your eyes so you're looking at the camera. And that requires a processor, something locally to be doing that work. You could put that onto the main processor, but then presumably you may affect the actual video and the rest of the operating system since it's so intensive. It's no different than how I'm using RTX Voice right now from NVIDIA, and that uses real-time processing, but it's using my GPU to do the processing. But as people found out, you can kind of hack it. So it does, if you don't have an RTX card, it can still just use your processor. But I imagine it's going to be taxing your CPU. If you're on a 65 watt or higher desktop, probably not a big deal. If you're on a laptop, it probably does make a big deal. So this is a project that Microsoft's been working on, and you're going to see more of this. It doesn't mean, though, like Intel has also been experimenting with putting dedicated AI and sub chips onto the boards. And you're going to see more of this, because things like Alexa integration and Cortana integration, still a thing. This idea that with a laptop is closed, but you can still have the microphones listening, and it could be a voice assistant even when it's, off, in standby mode. Well, you can do that by keeping the main CPU running. It's always running in the background, it's listening for audio input, but that's going to kill your battery. Or you create a smaller dedicated chip that's super low power, and its only job is to pay attention, and it can handle those without waking the main CPU. So that's why this is happening on the Pro X first. But like I said, companies like Intel. Intel's already doing stuff with the AI and dedicated chips. For instance, I believe on a new 10th gen stuff, specifically in Dell laptops, they monitor basically how you use apps and which apps you use the most. And then the processor is able to dynamically anticipate which apps you're going to use, even around like the time of day, and basically prioritize and give it a little performance boost versus other stuff. And that's really the power of going with these sub processors. Intel's also experimenting with basically copying Qualcomm's big small architecture, which is the idea you have dedicated cores that handle the main things and smaller cores that handle subtasks. That said, I did try this out. I couldn't get it to work.
that super long explanation of how incredible it is, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I tried so it's supposed to work with any camera app. That is Skype, I imagine Teams, I imagine Slack, whatever you're doing video on, it's supposed to work. I tried it with the camera app because I figured
it's a good start.
Yeah. And maybe it doesn't work on the camera app, which would be kind of weird. But I did things where like I would put a target in the middle of my screen, like a little Post-it, then I would stare at it, snap a photo, and then I would turn this feature on, because it was in the Surface app. There's a new ability to turn it on and off. Then I would turn it on, do the same thing, repeat, take a picture, no different. Then I was like, well, maybe it only works with video. So then I record a video, do the same thing. I couldn't get like any difference, because then I would compare it to it. Then I would actually look at the camera and snap a photo, or look at the camera and do a video. I couldn't see anything working. I don't know, maybe it only works on Skype where someone's looking at the video. I don't know. That said, I ended up uninstalling the dev build for other reasons. Sometimes Windows Hello was very slow to turn on. Sometimes it would turn on and it would be like, I'm looking for you, and it wouldn't see me, which is frustrating. So I'd have to go do the pin. Other times I've restarted it and the start menu, nothing was responsive. Like I could do Control-Delete and bring up menus and stuff like that, but I couldn't hit start. Nothing would pop up. I've had Wi-Fi problems. The device would resume. My Wi-Fi would get that globe and would just want to connect. I'd have to like force to connect and reconnect, and same with cellular. So I had all these sort of like other bugs that kind of drove me nuts. I rolled back, and now I went to the beta build, which tell us why it was a good thing for me to go to beta build, because that just got an update today.
Yeah, so the beta channel, which is currently testing 20H2, which is a scoped release coming in the fall of this year, September, October time, got a bunch of features from the dev channel that we've been testing in the last few weeks. Primarily the big stuff, including the theme-aware tiles in Start, the Alt-Tab changes with Microsoft Edge, the pinned site stuff, which I literally just mentioned, is also in this build today as well. The more personalized taskbar, improved notification UI, some settings updates, improvements to tablet mode. There's a lot of stuff here in this beta channel release, which, keep in mind, it's still a cumulative update. This doesn't require a full build install. This will apply to the system, if you're running 2004 at least, as a cumulative update. And we're getting a whole bunch of UI stuff in this release. So I'm glad to see the theme-aware tiles in Start. This is the biggest one for me. We talked about this in the dev channel a few weeks ago. This is Microsoft starting to sort of update the Windows 10 UI to bring it into a more modern era. Things like the tiles are now slightly translucent. They no longer have different colors behind them. They're either dark or light, depending on if you're using dark or light theme in Windows, and it looks way more modern. It's a much cleaner experience. It's a subtle change, don't get me wrong. It's not like an entirely new redesign. In fact, when Dan updated today, it's like, wait, is it on? Oh, it is on. Most people have that reaction, but once you notice it, it's like, oh, actually, that is better. So yeah, that's in this build, and so this will be shipping this year in the fall, which is super nice. The Alt-Tab stuff, which is essentially when you press Alt-Tab, the tabs you have open in Microsoft Edge will show up in that UI instead of just the one Microsoft Edge window, which is super cool. The improved pin sites in Microsoft Edge, as we just talked about, which someone in the chat is describing as essentially when you pin a website, any other tab from that site also appears when hovering over the app icon in the taskbar. So that makes a bit more sense. Thank you for explaining that to me, because I was too stupid to figure out. A more personalized taskbar for new users. So this is that thing we were talking about a couple episodes ago, where when you set up a new Windows 10 PC for the first time running 20H2 now, and you sign into a Microsoft account, if you already have say, an Android phone linked to your account, or you're a frequent Xbox gamer, you will automatically see things like your phone or the Xbox app pinned to the taskbar when you hit the desktop for the first time. So that's super nice to see here. The improved notification experience, just a minor update to the toast notifications when they come in. They match the Windows 10X sort of layout now. They're not rounded, at least not yet, but they are the formatting of where things are placed within the notification match Windows 10X now, and then some minor improvements to settings. The improvements to tablet experience is interesting because this isn't tablet mode. Tablet mode, as far as I'm aware, is dead. Like there's no updates to tablet mode really. What Microsoft seems to be doing is updating the desktop mode to work better when in tablet mode. So when you switch over to tablet mode, when you switch your PC from being a laptop mode into being in tablet mode, not from the software but physically, Windows will no longer automatically, or at least ask you to enter tablet mode. It will just automatically adjust a few things in desktop mode to make it easier to use with touch. It will shrink the search bar. It will make the pinned apps on your taskbar a little more spread apart so they're easier to hit. It will automatically add a keyboard button to the system tray, and it will also make context menus and buttons and File Explorer bigger. Apps still run in, app windows. They're not full screen by default in this mode. You can still enable tablet mode in the software if you want, which will full screen stuff and whatnot. But it does feel like to me that Microsoft is slowly moving away from the dedicated tablet mode in Windows 10 and instead just enhancing the desktop mode for tablets, which some people are going to be happy with, some people not. But that is what Microsoft seems to be doing.
As you were jabbering there, I was playing with that. I kind of really like this.
Yeah.
The animations are really nice on this, by the way. Like when you jump to different windows, there's sort of a little exploding effect instead of just it jumping on the screen. Like it seems like it comes from the center and spreads out real quickly. But between, the start menu looks really nice there. Let's see. So make sure I'm not showing anything. Yeah, so you can kind of see.
Look at all those games.
I know. And Pro X can game, so don't tell me it can't. But yeah, this is actually really nice. And for those that always that question, should you install? As I mentioned, I don't think you should install Dev on your main machine. The good news is if you do and you really want to risk it, you can always just roll back. It's not a big deal. The rolling back feature actually works very well.
Yeah.
But this beta release so far is really nice on the Pro X.
Mm-hmm.
Like none of those problems I have right now. Like the Windows Hello is very fast. It resumes quickly. Internet's always connected. The menus do look great. And I actually kind of like that tablet mode. I actually think that's kind of, or what do you want to call it? It's actually kind of nice. So yeah, so I'm going to probably after this podcast install the beta on my desktop here as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably stable enough for most people.
Yeah, the 20H2 beta channel releases are essentially retail builds because they're community updates that they're not risky to install. I recommend updating to the beta channel. As far as I'm aware, there's no known issues on the changelog. It's just a list of changes, improvements, and fixes, which you can read through if you'd like on the Windows blog. But yeah, no known issues in this release, which is excellent. Which makes sense, right? If this thing's coming out September, October, it's essentially done. So, good to see.
Someone's asking about rounded corners. Sadly, no.
No. So I am told Microsoft is working on this. They are planning to add rounded corners to the legacy version of Windows 10 sometime this year or next year. I don't know if that means shipping this year or just in the dev channel this year. I would assume dev channel this year because rounded corners are a little bit more of a complex thing to add to Windows. It's not as easy as just writing a bit of code and everything's got rounded corners now. That takes time, and you've got to make sure that the rounded corners aren't cutting into any content, especially with app windows. If Microsoft is planning to round app windows, they've got to be careful and make sure that things aren't being cut off at the corners and whatnot. So I think that'll be a dev channel thing this year, but I don't think it will ship in a public version of Windows 10 until next year. And that's just, I don't know that for a fact, but if I had to put money on it, I'd say that's what the plan is.
Put money on it. Yeah, I really, rounded corners for me are big. I've said before, I'm kind of over squares now and everything. Everything I'm looking at my desktop right now is a perfect square. It's fine. I mean, we need a change. I'm done with that whole experience. I like this idea of rounded corners and making things a little bit more modern. Nothing wrong with that. You can only ride a UI design for so long.
Yeah,
And
we've
we're
had it for
going a long
5 years. Come on now, it's time to move on.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot's changed in 5 years. Yeah, so hopefully, but yeah, so go install beta build. Looks good. Even if you install beta build and you don't like it, like I said, the rollback feature is really nice. It's actually very quick to roll back, so don't feel like it's that big of a risk, I think, in doing it. You'll also get the new Edge experience, which is kind of cool. Which is
Oh
when you
yeah,
first,
Microsoft
yeah,
Edge is
when you
pre-installed
first,
it on H2.
yep. And so you'll get the full screen Edge and all this, which some people won't like. I think looks really pretty. FedEx is here, but I don't need to sign for anything, so that's good. um, so, but good job, Microsoft. Where this is, as Zach and I were joking around before the podcast, what we think is the Panos effect. This is the stuff he was talking about, and he's been kind of promoting. It is weird watching Panos on Twitter because he's so much more involved now. He just he retweets tips on using Windows 10 and UI stuff, and I'm sure part of that is like a little bit of PR. He's selling this, but it's also because I know he's now really paying attention to this stuff, gauging feedback, seeing what people are expecting, what they want to see improved upon, boasting about stuff that does work well, so he can kind of go back because now he's kind of in charge of that stuff. And I'm all for this. But it seems like to me, he's sort of like, yeah, these UI changes are like, he's kind of slapping the Windows 10 team, like, go, ship it, do this stuff.
Yeah. This is the reinvestment in Windows Microsoft was talking about, I think.
Yep. And I'm all for it. So very good job. I'm actually happy with Microsoft there. Let's talk about Surface Duo at FCC, since so many people love the Duo, or at least talking about the Duo. And it's still ahead of schedule. And this is, Zach's been saying for months now, this was going to come out before the holiday season. And boy, they've been teasing a lot on social media. But now, last week we said, there's only a few hoops left to jump through. One of those is FCC certification. And lo and behold, Zach, what happened this week?
FCC, Surface Duo went through the FCC verification process. So if you look at the FCC ID website, you can check Microsoft's listings. And it turns out there's a phablet device in testing, Model 1913. I can confirm that Model 1913 is indeed the Surface Duo. There's not a lot of identifying information in the actual FCC listing itself. You have to dig real deep to find any mention of dual screen, or both screens as they refer to as. But it is in there. You can look for it, and that kind of confirms it. But if you didn't believe that, I've independently confirmed with my own sources that Model 1930 is at least one of the Surface Duo models that they are intending to ship. So it is passing for FCC. It's also got Bluetooth SIG or SIG certification as well, which is also required. Good to see that as well. So we're almost done. We're basically, I think we're less than a couple of months away at this point. I think it will be late August or early September when this thing starts shipping, which means pre-orders could be even earlier than that. Usually there's like a couple of weeks between pre-orders and shipping, but we'll have to wait and see if they still do that. Yeah, it's getting close. As Dan mentioned, lots of executives and people at Microsoft posting pictures of the Duo in their hands or on a table. Even Joe Belfiore today posted a picture for the first time with it holding a Surface Duo, so even he's on board. I think Microsoft knows that we know that it's coming early, and they're just sort of like teasing it at this point.
Sure.
Because there's really not a lot left for them to do internally, I don't think. I think they're finalizing the day one update, which any day now I think that could be done. The production validation, as I mentioned last week, should be at the tail end of that at this point. I don't think that's going to go on for too much longer, unless they've found significant issues with the production run that they've done, which I haven't heard is the case. This thing should be ready to manufacture as very soon, I think. So it's finally, I think we're in the final stretch. This is very exciting.
Yeah, I'm almost getting a little bit of butterflies in my stomach. I'll actually get butterflies when Microsoft is like, gives me the
PR.
number.
They're like,
yeah.
Hey, by the way, we have
PR.
a call for Surface related matters. Like, oh yeah, here it is.
Yeah, it's gonna be. I'll be very happy to see, because this device. I've talked about it endlessly. I'm not saying it's a slam dunk, but I'm very excited about trying the form factor and this dual screen experience, and testing and evaluating whether or not it really is, as what Microsoft is promoting it as, something that enables new experiences to be productive. I'm super into this concept. It's the reason why I like the Pro X so much. The Pro X allows me to connect anywhere. It's fast, always on, good enough battery life. It's basically all day for me. Um, it's about creating those, and this isn't for everybody, right? But for some people, this idea of like dual screens and working on things is super intriguing. Like I'm a big fan of Microsoft News. I use the News app all the time on all my devices. Like their reading mode that they have where it actually goes into, it looks like a book when you're reading articles. It's going to be genius for like reading like long news articles. I mean, I'm a huge fan also of in Edge, the reading mode, which I use all the time. If I go to the Atlantic and I'm going to read a long piece, oh yeah, I throw on reading mode, black background, the white text, large text removes all the like I love that. And this idea of having like a little digital book, like I said, there's the question about the real life experience. Every time a notification comes in, how do I feel about opening it up? Am I opening it up 10 times a day and it's just kind of annoying? Is the fingerprint reader not very good for logging in? Like these kind of experiences are going to be like what's interesting to test, but I'm excited about the potential there. And so, yeah, I'm actually really kind of excited about it. Like, and there's been a lot of like phone news this week, external stuff. LG's been making waves with the Velvet. OnePlus has their new Nord,
Yeah.
I think it is called. Yeah, Nord, which looks like a really awesome phone that, of course, is not coming to the United States. So, it was
finally something we get and you don't.
Finally, right? But then they got me kind of interested again in OnePlus because I was a early supporter of OnePlus. I went on record. I think I wrote a review saying OnePlus 6 is like the best phone, like for most people. The Pixel kind of stole some of that, but and then the last few OnePluses I haven't been that excited about. But then it got me looking at kind of the OnePlus 8 again. I was just like, maybe, but I just can't like buy that device for myself right now. Like I just can't. I know I'm using the Z Flip still as my main phone. I still have the iPhone 11, which I'm using iOS beta 14 on it. And that's all the room I have in my life. I can't go buy another candy bar phone. But Surface Duo, I'm very, very excited about putting it through its paces and seeing how good it is.
Me too. The FCC listing does raise some questions that people have sort of mentioned to me. So in one of the network tests, there's mention of NFC. And I've been saying for a while now that the Surface Duo doesn't have NFC. It won't have tap and pay. There's no NFC stuff inside it, according to my sources. People testing the device have not had NFC. There's been discussions internally. Why doesn't this thing have NFC?
Are like, what the hell? Why doesn't it have NFC?
Well, why? Who made this decision? But the FCC listing mentions an NFC test of some kind. Now I don't know how to read results of network tests, but there isn't a mention of NFC, and I have seen it, and people have said, "Oh, look, it has NFC. It has NFC." I have since spoken to many sources since then, and they are still telling me that no, it doesn't have NFC. It's possible that this NFC test was for some tech related to the pen. I don't know. Sources don't know. I'm just guessing at this point. But as far as I'm aware, this thing doesn't have tap to pay, which is the number one reason why I think you'd want NFC. And sources citing the reason for not having tap and pay is that there's no NFC technology inside it. So I don't know what this NFC listing is on this FCC thing. It could be a mistake. It could be referring to some part of NFC that's required for the pen to magnetically attach to the back. I don't know, but it's the NFC list is in there. I'm still saying that there's no NFC. I'm happy to be wrong on that. In fact, that's the one thing I really want to be wrong on, because I can live without wireless charging. But here in the UK, at least, and I think in a lot of places in Europe, tap and pay is the way to pay. You don't use a contactless card anymore or cash. You just use your phone. I know that's not the case in the US, but in a lot of other places it is. So I'd love to see NFC. The other thing people are wondering, which is, I literally just lost it. It was in my head. People were talking to me. Oh yeah, the LTE bands. It shows the LTE bands they've tested, and not all of them are there. I think most of them are in the US, so I think it will work on all three major US carriers, maybe even four of them. But elsewhere in the world, remains to be seen. Like, for example, the LTE bands that my carrier uses in the UK, O2, which is, I think, owned by Telefonica, they're not there. So that's a bit worrying. But I think the EE bands here in the UK are on it. So I don't know. Maybe there's a different model for EU markets, because I said this one's model 1930. That might be the US market model, and then the EU market might have a 1931 or something along those lines. We don't know. 1931 wouldn't show up in the FCC because, as far as I'm aware, the FCC is US only, right? I don't think FCC approval applies to the whole world. I could be wrong on that. No, it doesn't.
Just US.
It's just US. So yeah, who knows at this point? But I wouldn't be surprised if this thing's US only at launch, if I'm honest. It's an experimental form factor. Microsoft needs to be careful with this thing. There's a pandemic going on. They don't want to make too many and sell too few. They want to target specific areas, I think, and I think it will be US only at launch. Not that I've been told that's the case. I've actually been told there's potentially 12 markets, but I don't think they'll all be at launch. I think it'll be US at launch, and then later in the year we'll see it roll out to more of these markets, which is a shame. Which is true. Which, if it's true, I'm going to get Dan to import me one.
Not a problem. I love how Marquez Brownlee did a video a couple weeks ago on the OnePlus Nord, and now everybody's aware that and loves talking about how NFC costs $4 to put into a phone.
It's not about the cost.
Yeah, ergo everything in the world should just have NFC because it's only $4. What's the big deal? And I love how everybody is now an expert on making hardware where they can just be like, it's just $4. What's the problem? It's not about the cost on this device. I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue was the original design. This originally was meant to be basically a Windows device and not necessarily a phone in the traditional sense. Yeah, it was going to have cellular connectivity, but it wasn't going to be sort of that. And you can fault, we've talked about this. Zach wrote about this, like, what was it, 2017, 2016? Like, this device has been in the works for a very long time. And it goes back even further if you want, take into consideration Courier. But when they made it, it didn't have NFC. And you could be like, and they can't just like, I know we had this idea that you just crack it open, it's a box, and you slap this foil in there, like, done, it's NFC, $4. How hard is this? But it's not that easy because of the way the display technology works on this device. It's so thin because it has two screens. Even when it's closed, specs Zach tweeted this week, it's only like 9 millimeters. It's a very thin device, has glass backs on it. Like, it's not that you just could crack it open and throw in this thing and wire it up and not a problem. There's a lot more that goes into it. And there's this question of like, what's the return on this of investments, ROI, they call it. Like, is it worth another 6 months of development just to put this in? Even though, and let's be honest, fam, come on. Just because you put NFC in this, the critiques this device is going to get, NFC will be one of many things on it. Well, let's not act like adding NFC suddenly makes this the killer device that's going to blow away iPhone and whatever Samsung's coming out. We know that's not the case. Microsoft knows that's not the case. That's why version 2 and version 3 will be important. I get it. Like, it would be cool to have an NFC in there as well as Qi wireless charging. But I also understand the way how product development goes. It takes a long time to do this stuff. And it's not about just $4. Sometimes it is, right? I mean, OnePlus was like, we could get IP certification on our devices and it'll be like just $15 or so to get that done for testing. And they still say no, right? But it's only $15, it was what you would say. But it's more complicated than that. So I get it. If NFC is your make or break on this device, then don't buy it. It's totally fine. It's totally reasonable. And I'm sure Microsoft's going to take the feedback and they're going to take the reviews. And I'm sure they're already considering putting NFC into the next version because I get it. Touch, tap to pay, all that is super important now for some people.
It may even be a policy thing. I don't know if this is the case, but maybe it's an Android thing where you tap to pay only works if you have an external screen or a screen on show to confirm that the payment just went through. If you can't see the displays, that could be considered a security risk because somebody could just run up and put like a near field communications device that takes money from your phone and you'd never know, right? And without looking at the screen. So maybe there's a policy issue there. I don't know.
Listen, as corny as that sounds, this is like Apple excuses for stuff. Right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, Apple for years was like, I'll never forgive them and all the apologists who are like, Apple needs to make a big phone, large display, because everybody wants large displays. And Apple's like, You have to be able to reach your thumb across the screen and hit every item. Otherwise, it's a bad experience, and no one wants that. And then, like, it came out with a big phone, and everybody's like, "What? We didn't say that. No one said that." I mean, for years, Apple said we don't need Qi wireless because it's not very good. It's not efficient. Everybody has a plug and da 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 da. And then everybody's like, "Well, watch. Apple's going to reinvent wireless charging. It's going to blow your mind." And then they just end up putting Qi in their devices anyway. So yeah, I'm just saying, like, there is a certain amount of BS in this. I just think, and I'm pretty confident saying, this device was designed early. They locked onto that design. They didn't want to go back to the drawing board and have to re-engineer a bunch of it and delay it even further. When we have to remember, the Surface team is not like a dedicated phone Surface Duo group. They're working on like a lot. They're working on their existing products, laptop, Pro, Studio, Hub, all this kind of stuff. They're working on future products, and they're not devoting the entire team, the entire company to making Surface Duo the most killer phone on day one. It's more like an experimental device for them, and they want to kind of get it out there. So like, it's totally fine to criticize them on this stuff. But yeah, someone pointed out in comments, earphone jacks are like $1 too. Why aren't there headphone jacks at any phones anymore? It's only $1. Well, it's because it turns out when you talk to engineers, that space that thing takes up, it actually affects the device design. It's not about the cost, right? So I get it. It's fine to complain about this stuff, but there are reasons. And as I love to tell people, not every piece of hardware in this world was designed to please you. That's just the reality of it.
So, assuming my sources are right and Duo 1 doesn't have NFC, I'm very confident that Duo 2 does have NFC. So if you are a diehard NFC person and you really need it, wait for Duo 2 because I'm hearing it will have NFC.
NFC for life.
Live by the NFC, die by the NFC.
Yeah. And I'm one of those people though. Like, I do not care about NFC. I do not use tap to pay.
Because you're American.
Where I live, it's not that big of a deal. I don't go out a lot. I'm not out like, I get if you're out 10 times a day in the city and you got to pay for everything, it actually makes sense. And that's where you actually do find tap to pay. When you're in the suburbs, it's actually not that common to find. And between the pandemic and the fact I don't like people and I do most of my shopping online, like when I go, most of the time I use my credit card would be like movie theater, which a lot of times I can buy my tickets online anyway and just scan a QR code, so who cares? Or restaurants. And in the US, we still do this thing where you give them the credit card, they walk away with it.
That's crazy to me. That's insane.
It is crazy, right? It's because like there's this video, I'm going to go a little rant here, but there's a video a couple months ago, most of you probably saw this woman complaining that she had to wear a mask going into a store. And the store's like, well, we can do your shopping for you and you can wait out here.
Which is great. I'd be like, yeah, do that.
Yeah. And she's like, well, how will I pay for it? And they're like, well, you just give us our credit card and we'll pay for it. I'm not giving you my credit card. I'm like all of us click. I'm like, all we do in the United States is give people our credit cards and they walk away with it. Like it happens all the time when you go to a restaurant. In fact, only fancy restaurants do it like that, right? So I don't know. It's funny, but yeah, that's my point. I'm one of those people. I don't care about NFC. Same with wireless charging. Like I like wireless charging. My Tesla has wireless charging built into it. But it's not a make or break. But if it is for you, same with the headphone jack, you absolutely need 3.5 millimeter. You're an audiophile. And if you call yourself an audiophile, a lot of your friends hate you. I'm just going to tell you. They won't tell you. But if you call yourself an audiophile, your friends are going to constantly roll their eyes at you behind their back, and they secretly hate you.
Oh, no.
But I get if like you want a headphone jack in a device. Surface Pro X doesn't have a headphone jack. It's mildly inconvenient sometimes, but hey, that's technology for you. So,
well, that's the Surface Duo coming soon to a Microsoft store near you, which will be very few of you at this point.
Right. Let's go to Xbox Games Showcase. So Microsoft was criticized back in, I believe, March. They had an event. They showed off some stuff, but it wasn't gameplay. It was a lot of trailers. And the problem with game trailers is, I always hate, is I get it. They always show you the cut screens and the story, and it's epic looking. But then That's because most gameplay isn't that exciting. It's okay to watch, but watching someone just walk through a world is really
And
not
you
that
know,
exciting.
we've really learned that this week with the Halo Infinite
Yes.
demo.
So Microsoft responded to that and they put together an hour-long event. And to their credit, a lot of games are showing up. I think it was like 22 games, most of them console exclusives, part of the Xbox One X, Series X, whatever you want to call it. Um, and what's I thought the big story was everything they showed off, like all 22 games, are part of Game Pass. So you don't need to even buy this. If you're part of Game Pass, you get the Series X, you're going to get all these games. And what was cool was there was just so much variety. There was like horror, there was sci-fi, there was Tetris, and of course there was Halo. But like when you have Game Pass, it's just like it's so cool because let's talk about the new Halo game. Zach's a huge Halo fan. I don't hate Halo. I've never been exposed to it enough to get into it. I tried Halo 5, wasn't my jam. But I'm one of those people that's willing to be convinced if they make a really good Halo 5, I'm willing to give it a shot, you know? Do I want to drop $60 on Halo 5 as a newbie who's not into the story at all? Probably not. If it's part of Game Pass, oh my God, it just means I just download it, try it out. If I like it, cool. If I don't, no big deal. So I thought that was the big story. But Zach, tell us about Halo. You're the Halo fan.
So the problem with Halo Infinite is that we've known about it for so long now. Like, we're in year 3 of Halo Infinite being a thing that we know about and haven't seen anything of until this Xbox Game Showcase. So it was announced in 2018 with like a sort of in-engine trailer, which didn't show any gameplay, but just the engine stuff, I guess. Then 2019, we had a sort of cinematic trailer, sort of introducing us to Master Chief and our sidekick for the campaign story. And then this year, we've had gameplay, like actual gameplay. It's the one thing Halo fans have been asking for: show us gameplay of Halo Infinite. And the game, it's very interesting because I watched the gameplay and I was very excited about it, but I don't think I was incredibly hyped by the gameplay. Microsoft released a trailer for the campaign after the show. It wasn't part of the show at all. You can go to the Halo YouTube channel and watch the trailer. The trailer does a much better job at hyping this game up. After watching the trailer, I was like, oh yeah, I'm excited for this game now. The gameplay in the showcase wasn't incredibly thrilling. It just showed off the fact that it's basically open world. You can drive around in a warthog. You can shoot bad guys like Halo normally can. A couple of new mechanics. There's like you can grapple hook yourself around like Spider-Man now. There's also the ability to throw things like fusion coils, which you've not been able to do before. But the sort of 8-minute gameplay demo really had no sustenance to it. There was no real reason for them to show off this specific part of the game. Previous gameplay demos at E3 and stuff, they show off like interesting new gameplay mechanics and whatnot. And I guess throwing a fusion coil can be considered interesting, but I don't think it's interesting enough. They didn't do any. They didn't show off the open world. They didn't talk about the actual story beats. We still don't know anything about this story. We know that the Banished are part of it, which is an enemy from Halo Wars 2, and that's basically it. We don't know why the Master Chief's here, what happened to get here, where's Cortana. None of it. We don't know a single thing, and I think a lot of Halo fans came away from this slightly disappointed. I wasn't disappointed. I'm a Halo fan. Whatever. I think the biggest thing, though, that people aren't too pleased with is the graphics. This gameplay demo, for some reason, doesn't look amazing. In some areas it does. In motion, it looks okay, but if you pause it at any one point and just look at the screen, it's not looking great. And we don't really know why. Apparently, the gameplay demo was filmed months ago, back in June, right, for E3. E3 didn't happen. So maybe that's why it's looking bad. Apparently more recent builds are looking a lot better, but I don't know why they chose to show this, to showcase the power of Xbox Series X. Because again, they didn't show off the open world part. If they were like, by the way, you can fast travel and it's instant because of Xbox Series X and it's fast SSD and whatnot, then great, I would totally understand that. They didn't show none of that. It was just a very short demo of a very localized area in the open world. They did nothing to showcase the power of Xbox Series X, in my opinion. So, and this was the opening thing, like the showcase started, and this was the first thing. So I think it fell kind of flat on its face out of the door. But I think the show improved. Things like Next Gen Forza, excuse me, Everwild, a new State of Decay 3 is announced.
Psychonauts 2.
Psychonauts 2. There's Avowed. There's some Outer Worlds DLC on the way. Tell Me Why, which is from the Life is Strange developers. So like a sort of choice-based cinematic game story thing, like The Last of Us and whatnot. Then we've also got the Fable reboot, which was the sort of and one more thing at the end. There was no gameplay for that. It was literally just like a very brief teaser, which I guess means it's in very early development and won't be there at launch. Tetris Effect. Why they're showing off Tetris for an Xbox Series X based show?
Listen, I mean, I kind of like stuff like that. Like I joked around. I didn't put it on Twitter. I was going to that. I still need my Peggle 3. I think Peggle's one of the greatest games.
Peggle is pretty good. You're not wrong, actually.
So like, I'd love to see Peggle 3 in 4K, 120 frames per second. Those little kind of games, Tetris is one of those things that's easy to be like, who cares about Tetris? What's the story? But Tetris is super addictive. There's a reason why you could say Tetris and we all know what it is, and we could automatically hear that song in our head. Because it was just so. And Psychonauts is kind of the same way. I never played Psychonauts. I just know it's like a legendary game. Although it's been so long for a sequel that almost anyone watching this didn't know what Psychonauts 1 was. What's the other game where you're shrunk in the backyard? It was a demo out recently.
Good question. I'm looking for the name of it now, and I can't find it. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I think it's. I can't remember. I keep talking. I'll try and find it.
All right. It was a single word. This idea is like you're in the backyard. It's kind of like Fortnite almost. It looked like a little bit Fortnite-ish, but you can play by yourself or with friends, and you're running around the backyard. It's just awesome because the graphics are really nice. You also get to like the big threat is going to be insects, ladybugs, and spiders. It's not called Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. That was a movie. It's very much like that, though. But it's really cool to be able to climb plants. You find like juice boxes for energy and stuff like that. Oh, Grounded.
Grounded, yeah. I just found it.
Grounded's the name of it. There was a demo of this recently. You can download and try it, and it was still pretty rough, but it's a pretty cool experience. I'm a big fan of like those kind of games. There's another one years ago on Xbox, Toy Soldiers or something like that. It was the same kind of concept. You're in a big room, kids' toys. Mm-hmm. I like stuff like that. I think it's fun. I think Grounded looks a lot of fun. So.
Real quick as well, Microsoft also announced a partnership with Bungie, which is funny because Microsoft Studios used to sort of own Bungie until they departed to make Destiny. They announced that Destiny 2 will be making its way to the Xbox Series X, running at 60 FPS with 4K resolution, and that Destiny 2 will be coming to Game Pass and be part of xCloud as well. So that's
a big deal because Destiny 2 technically went free to play.
Yeah.
Some people are like, well, what's the big deal? But it always hooks you in. Yeah, it's free to play up to a certain point. All the expansion packs, all the cool stuff, you have to buy. That's how they make their money.
And that will be on Game Pass.
And that's going to be on Game Pass. And that's awesome. I'm a big fan of Destiny. I'm a fan of the game, and I like Destiny 2. I'm not religious about it. Like, I honestly haven't played it in probably about 4 months. I miss a lot of these expansion packs. I have no idea what the story is. But I'm pretty excited about trying to get back into it. I love the mechanics on Destiny. It just, I've just criticized Destiny 2 when it first came out. It's like, same with Borderlands 3. It's just more of the same. You're just running around, and I'm like, yeah, that's why I play it. That's what makes it fun. I like sometimes just loading up Destiny and just going around and going to the public battles and just fighting a giant monster thing. I'm excited about that. So. And that looks fantastic.
Yeah. And most of the other stuff were games that have already been announced, just deeper looks and whatnot. So I think this showcase was better than the one they did in, was it May, June, earlier this year? For sure. But the Halo Infinite demo was definitely a weird choice for what they showed off. Like, yeah, the gameplay just doesn't do a good job at hyping you up for Halo for some reason. But the trailer does. The trailer that wasn't in the showcase does a great job at it. I don't know.
I'm telling you, this is what I would love to see this happen because one, I don't care about Halo. Two, I love pissing off gamers. I want them to like zoom in. It's like far out, and you see like Master Chief on a mountain. And he's maybe got heads of whatever those monsters are that he fights from this story, the Flood or whatever. And they zoom in. It's this amazing music. And he pulls his helmet off and shakes. He's got long hair.
Woman. Yeah.
It's a woman. and they make it into like, but he's trans.
Oh.
And like, and then a rainbow flag comes down. Like for me, that would be like so awesome, just because I'd love to see the outrage from gamers who'd freak out. But I don't know. I still think it's funny with Metro. Like people get upset that the Metro character was female, which I just think is awesome.
Yeah, I love twists like that. It's like, oh, I never saw it
Yeah.
coming. Great.
It was Mr. Chief the whole time. Like, that'd be so funny. I just would love to just watch the outrage on Twitter. It'd be so good. But yeah, I'm willing to give the new Halo a shot. It's easy to make fun, as you pointed out, about the graphics, but it is still early. We don't know the story behind that. Jez is just quoted in our games editor is a little bit, he's trying to temper expectations. He doesn't think it's going to be a massive shift between now when it comes out. But, listen, it comes down to this too. It's not all about graphics, right?
True.
And I know it's cliche, especially when we're talking about Series X, which is like the most powerful console in the world, and 8K. Like, I know that's the story been telling. But ultimately, what makes gaming good and certain games legendary is the story, the mechanics, and people getting into it. Like, listen, I still can't there's World of Warcraft. Like that game's been around forever, and people still play. What's some of the other ones out there? StarCraft, right? StarCraft 2. Those games have been out forever, and the graphics aren't amazing anymore, but people play it because it's good gameplay, right? So I'm not saying that's an excuse. They supposedly invested, was it $500 million to make this game? Like, you hope that if the graphics aren't amazing, it's because the open world expandability, and it's supposed to be larger than Halo 4 and 5 combined and stuff like that. Like, you hope that sort of makes up for it. And so I'm just one of those people that believes, let's wait till it comes out. It's fun to make fun of it. I mean, some of the memes are hilarious.
Yeah, I think one of the other reasons why it didn't look too great was because of the time of day in the game. It was dusk, I think, or it was sunset, and it cast this orange light on everything, which I think may have washed out a lot of the textures as well. I don't know. I've not played Halo Infinite, of course, and I'm assuming there's a day-night cycle if it's open world and whatnot. But we'll have to see, of course. In pure daylight, noon o'clock, I'm sure it looks way better, but who knows?
Oh, well, we got time yet for our Series X. By the way, there was also some reporting that it is still slated to come out for November. Mm-hmm. There was some of us thought maybe it was going to come out earlier, but it sounds like November is still the time frame for expectations on Series X. I want to head back quickly. Something about, we were talking about Windows 10 earlier, about the beta and dev builds, about the new UI features. So it's really, I want to clarify, on dev, a lot of the new UI features are actually in A/B testing, which means
stupid.
Yeah, this is why I was actually kind of surprised, because in my Pro X, when I installed dev build, I didn't have the new start menu, so I was part of the B group, I guess. That's not the case on beta. If you install beta, you're going to get the new UI changes. It's for everybody. Brandon LeBlanc also said they're working to turn it on now for the dev build too, so it should be coming there. So that's just, I know it's weird, but that's the difference between dev build, where they're literally testing, versus beta, which is now you're testing a feature that will be shipping for final confirmation. So good to know. Whew, all right. Well, I'm done, I guess, because now we can go and talk to Mary Jo Foley, or you can talk to her, regarding Windows 10X, the cloud, some news around that, about the future of this operating system. Did I set that up correctly? You want to take over?
Yeah, you did, yeah. Dan will be back after, because this is a pre-recorded segment. We did this yesterday. Just because schedules didn't line up. Dan will be back after this bit to sort of sign off the podcast. And if you're listening live, we will hang around to do some questions just briefly, because this podcast is going to run a little bit over the usual hour and a half. But yes, without further ado, here is Mary Jo Foley's segment of the podcast. Okay, so joining me now, it's the wonderful Mary Jo Foley from allaboutmicrosoft.com. Mary Jo, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me back. I think it's my second time on the podcast.
It's been, I think, exactly a year, or just about a year since you were last on, which is hilarious because a year ago we were talking about, if you remember, a possible Surface phone with Android.
Oh man, yep, yep, yep.
And it turns out that did happen, but not in the
I
way
know.
we thought it was going to happen. I think, do you not remember? I think we were talking about how we were assuming it was going to be like a standard smartphone.
Yep.
Turns
Yep.
out they recycled Andromeda.
No, yeah. No, we were pretty close to guessing that one, but not exactly right.
Yeah, which, let's give ourselves a pat on the back for at least getting that it was coming. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep, yep. I know. Sometimes you hear these rumors when you hear things about Microsoft and you're like, that's not going to happen. But then you're like, well, or is it?
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Well, which is actually funny enough, kind of what we're talking about today. So this past week, we sort of had a 1-2 double punch when it comes to scoops
Yeah.
in the world of Windows. Because for a while now, we've not heard any Windows news from Microsoft. It's been kind of slow. But then this week, out of nowhere, two big developments regarding Windows 10X and Windows as a whole sort of showed up. And I want to talk a little bit about your story first. So this week, you had a scoop talking about something called Cloud PC, which I think could be the future of Windows if it's done right.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it sounds kind of crazy when you're like, would everybody move to a world where the desktop is virtualized? And we almost start talking about like Windows thin clients again, right? I don't think it's for everybody, and I don't think Microsoft will make it something everybody has to do, at least not anytime soon. But it's an interesting model for people like me who don't really need all the local compute power on your device. You just need certain apps that work, and you can spin them up on whatever device you're using.
I'm exactly the same. All you really need is Notepad.
I do, pretty much. A browser and Notepad, and I can do my job pretty much.
So why don't you explain what exactly this Cloud PC is for those who may not be familiar?
Okay. So if you know what Windows Virtual Desktop is, which is Microsoft's virtualization service built on Azure, you pretty much know what Cloud PC is going to be. So the way I'm hearing it described from my contacts is Microsoft takes WVD and then they add a desktop as a service layer on top of that so that you will be able to virtualize Windows and your Office apps and some other, I'm not sure which other apps will be there, but some other Microsoft apps and maybe third-party apps, and it will all be delivered to you as a service so that you won't actually be installing apps on a device. You'll be spinning them up virtually whenever you need them.
So why do you think Microsoft thinks this is something people want? Because this Cloud PC thing, although it's built on Windows Virtual Desktop, which for those who don't know is a enterprise grade service, right? That's not something consumers would generally use. This Cloud PC stuff we think might be more consumer facing, right? People at home could subscribe to this service and actually use it as well. Do you know if Microsoft knows what kind of person would want to use this?
I'm sure they do know because you know how when they develop something, they use personas, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, who would this be for, right? So they've thought about who would this be for? And I think they're thinking consumers, but also business customers too.
Yeah.
So the way they're going to roll it out, if you think about how Office 365 works, it's going to be kind of like that, right? It'll be a flat fee that you pay monthly or probably annually. There'll be a deal, some kind of deal. And then that will entitle you to spin up this virtual desktop on a device or multiple devices of your choice. So the part I'm most intrigued about is, okay, of course it's going to work on Windows 10 PCs, but will it also work everywhere WVD works? And if that's true, it means it'll work on the Mac and it will work on iOS and it will work on Android and maybe Linux even one day, right? So, I mean, this could be the way, yet another way where Microsoft kind of takes the OS out of the equation and just says, we know what people care about. They care about apps. So the best way to deliver the apps that you want to need on whatever device you have is to do it virtually.
Yeah. Do we know if users will be able to install anything to this virtual machine, or will it be a supported list of programs?
So I don't know the answer to that, but the way I've heard this described is it'll work on your existing Windows 10 device. So it'll work on the Windows 10 PC that you have, and that could be a 10X device, by the way. It could be a new device or an older device running Windows 10. And if that's true, it makes me think you would be able to still have things locally installed on your device if you want and need those, but it'll just be like a set of core computing experiences managed, maintained, and secured by Microsoft that will come to you through Cloud PC.
Yeah, because I'm wondering, in my head, this cloud PC service works something like this. I have a Windows PC, I have a Windows 10X device, I may even have a Mac, whatever. On Windows, at least, whenever I log into my Microsoft account, if I'm signed up to this cloud PC service, in my start menu, when you hit the desktop for the first time, you'll see, the locally installed default inbox apps. But then you'll also see those cloud PC apps that you've got installed in the cloud. For example, that could be Spotify or Microsoft Word or Visual Studio. And then it's ready to go. You click on it and it just connects to the service and that program is ready to go. That's how I'm picturing this will work, but knowing Microsoft, it probably won't be that smooth.
Well, for this to work, it's got to be really smooth and it's got to be very transparent, right?
Yes.
You can't be knowing you're running stuff virtually or it doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
So there's some precedents for this if you think about it. Remember when we were all hearing rumors of Windows 365 and then Microsoft's like, we're not doing that. Well, they're kind of doing that with this. It's not so much focused on Windows, though. It's more focused on the apps.
Yeah.
And then they've also got something for very big enterprise customers that they do currently called the Microsoft Managed Desktop. And that's where Microsoft sets up your PC for you and they update the Windows 10 feature updates for you and they kind of keep it all maintained and running and secure 24/7. But that's just for enterprises, right?
Yeah.
And it's not a virtualized desktop experience. But if you think about how they've been kind of building their expertise and you look at what they've been doing with Microsoft 365 and Office 365 and then this managed desktop service, they've been kind of laying the groundwork for them to be able to pull something like this off.
Yeah. And as far as I'm aware, Windows Virtual Desktop itself has become very successful. At least it's doing really well for Microsoft. Like it's a service that I think is doing better than they were expecting it to do in the enterprise, at least.
Yeah.
And I do wonder, do we know if xCloud, the technology behind xCloud, is the same as what Windows Virtual Desktop uses, or is it similar stuff? I assume there's shared technologies behind that, right?
I would assume that too. And here's a little kind of fun fact about this. So the guy who used to build the early versions of what became xCloud, I forget what the code name was back in the day, like Rio or something, where Microsoft was talking about being able to stream games. That guy, his name's Scott Manchester. He went on to become the head of Windows Virtual Desktop.
Right.
And when I met him, when they were launching Windows Virtual Desktop, I said to him something about, I don't know, like what he used to do before. And he's like, well, I used to work on that game streaming service that never came to be for Microsoft. And now if you look at his LinkedIn profile, I think he's working on Cloud PC. It doesn't say Cloud PC, but it says he's working on like managed desktop experiences. So I'm like, oh, I think he's one of the main guys doing Cloud PC. So I agree with you. I think it may not be exactly Windows Virtual Desktop under the covers of xCloud, but it's definitely some shared technologies and kind of shared experience and heritage that's underneath.
Because I assume if Microsoft can pull off xCloud, which is essentially streaming a video game, the frames are refreshing every second for like a smooth 60 frames per second gameplay experience. If you can do that, then doing it for a static app should be a piece of cake, right?
Should be a lot easier for sure. It definitely should. And they're all on Azure, right?
Yes.
So WVD is Azure powered. This new Cloud PC is going to be Azure powered, and xCloud also Azure powered. So they're all building on all the capabilities Microsoft's built up inside the Azure stack.
Yeah. And I think this Cloud PC stuff falls nicely into the scoop that I had last week, because I had this Windows 10X scoop in regards to the Win32 stuff. So for those who may not have listened to last week's podcast, I've been hearing for a while now that Windows 10X will be launching without the Veil container support in next year, which means no local Win32 programs. But I was also hearing that Windows 10X would support streaming apps virtually, these legacy programs via the cloud. But I didn't have the Mary Jo Foley scoop, which was that service specifically, because I was hearing it was a Windows Virtual Desktop thing, but Windows Virtual Desktop is enterprise. So how would that work in context of Windows 10X in the education market? I assume educational establishments could sign up to Windows Virtual Desktop. But if me, for example, goes and buys a Surface Go 3 with Windows 10X, I'm not signing up to Windows Virtual Desktop. But I think this is where Cloud PC comes in.
Yeah, I do too. I heard the exact tip you had about Veil. So when you had that, I'm like, yep, I heard the same thing. Like Win32 containers not going to be part of 10X when it debuts.
And this is a big thing, right?
So that makes you think like, okay, so they don't want to do Windows RT and Windows 10 S mode again, right? Like, so they've got to have a backup plan. But what's the plan for people who have to have certain Win32 apps? Oh, Cloud PC. Yeah. And they're both debuting in the spring of next year if they stick to their schedule. So that seems like they're kind of connected, right?
Yeah, and the whole Windows RT comparison I think is exactly right. Without Cloud PC, Windows 10X does become another Windows RT
Yeah.
like act, which is interesting because Chrome OS, Windows 10X. Let's actually talk about the journey of Windows 10X, because if you remember, when we all started talking about Windows 10X back in I think December 2018, or when it was codenamed Windows Lite and Santorini, and at the time we were hearing that this thing was a Chrome OS competitor.
Yeah.
It was going to target low-end PCs. It was going to compete head-to-head with Chromebooks in the low-end market. It was going to be this lightweight version of Windows. But then when it was announced in October 2019, it was this completely different thing, exclusive to dual screens, coming on these ultra premium foldable PCs. And I was like, why? What happened? Why are you doing
I felt
this?
like, so when they said that, I remember still talking to them about this, and when they first started talking about 10X, and I'm like, so this is like Windows Lite, the Santorini stuff we've been reporting. They're like, oh no, it's not that. I'm like, yes, it is. Of course it is. Like, that's what it is, right? And then I'm like, so how does this compete with Chrome OS? They're like, oh no, we designed this for dual screen devices. I'm like, come on, no, you're lying.
Yeah, so I asked them straight up, is this Windows Core OS? And they told me flat out no, which was just a straight lie.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, if we're going to play that game, let's play that game. But we knew this Windows 10X thing was this Chrome OS thing from the beginning. And the pandemic's come along and kind of shaken things up internally at Microsoft. And this is why they're refocusing on the single screen low end stuff. But I think it's a shame because Microsoft has dug themselves in this hole, because now it looks like Windows 10X development is all over the place because they can't decide what they want to do, when in reality they've wanted to do this since the beginning, and for some reason they came out with this dual screen exclusive nonsense.
So I don't know if you think this is what happened. My guess is they decided they wanted to debut it on dual screens because they're like, we want to have it debut in a way that we can have it be like a controlled experience, right? So we don't want it to go out to the mass market, to everybody. So what's a way we can like almost do A/B testing with it, and we'll put it on this device that not that many people are going to buy, but the people who buy it will be able to study how they use it. And so let's put it on dual screens first, right?
I agree.
And I feel like that's kind of how they ended up at that point. But then, like you said, when the pandemic hit, they were like, nobody's going to buy a dual screen Windows PC that's going to cost multiple thousands of dollars. Like, people are out there going to Best Buy buying the cheapest PC they can buy to use for work. So we've got to rethink where we position 10X, right?
and with that repositioning comes the launch schedule that you've been hearing about specifically, spring 2021 for the single screen stuff, and I believe this was something you had. Dual screen will be 2022, a year later, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
So I've seen some people reporting that 10X first iteration is delayed. I don't consider that a delay, actually. If they get this out in the spring, I think they're doing pretty well.
Yeah, that's only, but yeah, because
reposition, right?
Yeah, originally it was holiday 2020, right?
Right,
So a 6-month-ish delay isn't the worst thing in the world, especially in, I guess maybe the pivot to single screen helps with that, and the fact that they're pulling Veil out from the initial launch product. I think one of the reasons why Windows 10X was initially delayed was because of the Veil technology and them struggling to get it to work well with some programs, but also from a performance perspective, especially on these low-end devices. I don't think Veil was operating too well, but we are hearing that Veil will still be part of Windows 10X eventually, possibly on these dual screen devices when it launches in 2022, right?
Right, that's what I'm hearing. So the part of my story that I wrote when I wrote about 10X and Veil, because I also wrote a story too, was I think what they're going to do to try to keep 10X momentum going is they're going to switch up how they develop Windows client. So instead of having, feature update spring, feature update fall for Windows 10, instead what they might do is focus spring releases on 10X and focus regular 10 releases on the fall. So that would mean 10X almost becomes its own thing. It like has its own level of priority and gets pushed much further than it would if they were kind of developing it on the side and continuing with two feature updates a year for plain old Windows 10.
That would be really interesting because you're right. It does, at least externally, shows that Microsoft cares about Windows 10X. I think a lot of people are worrying that Windows 10X is going to become this side project, this thing that Microsoft doesn't really care about and will eventually just die off from lack of support and whatnot. Right. But I really don't think that's the case. For me, I think what Microsoft wants like the North Star for Microsoft is Windows 10X, right? They wish Windows was Windows 10X everywhere.
Yep.
Because it's based on this Windows Core stuff, which is much more modern. They've got faster Windows updates. It's just a much better, more secure operating system from a kernel level, at least, compared to legacy Windows 10. But there's no easy path to just upgrading legacy Windows 10 users to this Windows 10X, because you would lose a lot of legacy features, which many enterprises and even consumers, I guess, rely on every day, right? So they can't just swap out Windows 10 for Windows 10X.
No, I mean, if you're a Windows 10 Pro or Enterprise customer and you look at 10X, like the renders we've seen of 10X and the things we've heard about it, you're like, wait a minute, I can't use that. Like, it's okay. Like, it would be cool on my home device, but like for what I do at work, I really need all the bells and whistles of 10 Enterprise, and I don't think 10X is going to have that. So Microsoft's, their biggest strength and their biggest weakness is they never leave people behind, right? They always keep supporting people like Windows 7 and Windows 8.1 and Windows 10, like the old variants and LTSC, right? So they're going to keep going with Windows 10. They're just going to kind of reduce the frequency probably and the priority of it and try to bring 10X along for the ride. And then if this cloud PC service takes off, that gives them a really nice segue to say, okay, you still need Win32, here you go.
Yeah.
You've got that container coming, the Win32 container on 10X, and then you've got the streaming service. So you're all good. Like, let's look at 10X as it evolves, right?
And I think as well, since Windows 10X is so stripped back, I think this is why they're also going after the Chrome OS, iPad OS market initially, because the people who buy those devices aren't people who rely on legacy Win32 support, right? These people are working in the browser 90% of the time. Perhaps they use Spotify and maybe Office outside of the browser, but they're not doing much else. That's me, pretty much.
Me too.
I was looking at my start menu earlier this week, and I was like, most of these web programs I've got installed are web apps. I can use them in the browser if I wanted to. So I am probably the target market for Windows 10X. But of course, that isn't everyone, and that's why Microsoft isn't forcing Windows 10X onto everyone as well.
Exactly.
I did want to ask you regarding the schedule. Although it seems likely that they'll do the 10X release first half, then legacy Windows 10 second half, do you still think we will see minor H1 or H2 releases for Windows 10? Like right now we're seeing 20H2, which is like it's a feature update, but it's not a fefeature update. It's a cumulative update thing. Do you think we'll still see that for Windows 10?
So if they don't put out a 21H1 Windows 10 feature update, that means the fall update will be a big update, right?
Yeah.
It'll be everything since 20H2. And instead of going with these cumulative updates like we've seen with 1909 and whatever the fall update's called, 20H2, it'll change back to being a full update and not be a minor cumulative update.
Right.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
So here's the interesting question. Like, what does this mean for the insider program, right?
Yeah.
Because right now, if you're in the dev channel, you're testing a bunch of features which you thought may or may not debut as part of 21H1. What if there is no 21H1? Are you testing things for 21H2 now? Or are you maybe testing some things that are going to be in 10X?
Yeah, that's
right?
I've definitely speculated about that, because when the insider program changed the dev channel, at least they changed the reasoning for it. It's now we can pull features whenever we want. We can put experimental features in. Experimental features could just mean features that they never intend to ship on Windows 10, but are for Windows 10X, right? For example, that comes to the top of my mind, the new Action Center on Windows 10X. It's got a new design and some other fancy stuff in it. They could test that on Windows 10, even if they never intend to ship it on Windows 10, which I think would be a shame, but they could do that if they wanted to.
Yeah. Well, when they decided to tell us that they were retargeting 10X for a single screen device, they also kind of hinted that there were going to be features in 10X that would become part of 10, right? And so they didn't tell us which features, but you can guess, like security things, UX things, that kind of stuff probably will be something that is in both 10X and 10.
Yeah, I would love to see the faster Windows updates on Windows 10, because I think a big sore point for lots of Windows 10 users is Windows Update being so slow, especially with feature updates. But on Windows 10X, that issue is apparently resolved. Windows updates take 30 seconds or less to just get installed, which is a huge improvement.
It is. It's a huge improvement.
Yeah.
But the question is, how much of that is tied to what they're doing with Core OS?
Right.
and how much of it will never come over to 10 because it's impossible to undo the way 10's built completely, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Like
think you're right.
and Core and WCOS are not the same thing, right?
Yeah, which is also another confusing mess.
Yeah.
Sometimes I receive internal documents like, yeah, but which Windows core is this referring to?
I know. And you know what the trick is? Is it lowercase c or upper?
Yeah.
That's it, right? Like, because if you see Windows Core with the lowercase c, it means like one core. And if you see Windows Core with the uppercase c, it means WCOS, I think.
The Windows core stuff is really interesting to me because it's changed shape so much since we first started talking about it. It was originally going to be this Andromeda thing, then it was going to be this Polaris thing for a short while. Then Terry Myerson left, and then those things weren't happening now. I think Windows Core has shipped on HoloLens 2. I think HoloLens 2 is a Windows Core OS product.
Yeah.
So I guess it's working in some form, but they've struggled so much to get Windows Core out for like a consumer-facing market, right? This Windows 10X stuff will be the first time consumers, air quotes, can get their hands on a Windows Core product. And do you think it will go well?
First iterations of Microsoft products usually don't.
Yeah.
I still have hope though, just because it's taken them years and years and years of development, that maybe it's not going to be a true V1. Maybe it's going to be like a V2 or 2.5.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be an optimist about it because the thing I really like in what we've seen about 10X so far is the UI.
Yeah.
Here, because I talk about this on my podcast Windows Weekly all the time, which is normal people, you know what their biggest pain point is on Windows right now? They can't find where they put stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because most people aren't organized, right? They just hit save and it saves somewhere and they're like, I don't know where my document is. I have no idea where it is, right? And the UI, if you look at what they're doing with 10X and the Android launcher and Office.com, they all have this new thing where it surfaces your most recently used documents and makes it really easy for you to go back and find it. And for enthusiasts and for people who are more advanced users, they're like, oh, come on. But for normal people, this is huge.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think Microsoft tried this on Windows 10 with Timeline, right? That was originally the plan for Timeline. It was going to be this thing that your recent documents are all here. You can scroll back 30 days and find anything you've been working on. But it really hasn't taken off in that way, right?
Timeline.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for me like that. Like I thought it was going to be good for me that way, but whenever I stumble onto Timeline by accident, I'm like, oh yeah, Timeline. Oh yeah, I never used that, right?
I think it might be partly because of where it is. It's in Task View, which I'm not sure many people access on a daily basis. If it was in the Start menu.
Yeah, people don't even know what that thing is. You're like, that thing that looks like a ladder on the taskbar. I'm like, yeah, that's the task view. That's the task view.
Yeah, I feel like task view is one of those things people hide along with Cortana and the search bar.
It is. I know. Yep. And they're like, oh, wait, I don't even have that on my taskbar. I'm like, yeah, you took it off. Okay.
Yeah. So if we're expecting Windows 10X to launch in spring 2021, that must mean it will be RTMing in December, right? Based on the Azure development cycle that we know about now.
Okay, so that's an interesting question too, right? So will 10X adhere to that? I would think it will. I think,
as I've heard, it does. I mean, that could change, but at least as of right now, I think this second half development cycle they're in, July to December, is the final wave of Windows 10X development for the shipping product. So if it RTM's in December, then it could launch in January, February. But you're hearing spring, so
which could mean May, June, July.
Yeah.
And I had somebody who was in education ping me on Twitter, and he goes, "Wait, so you're saying 10X might be targeted at the education market, but if it comes out in spring, that's too late." I'm like, spring for Microsoft means May, June, July, so that's like back to school, right? And he goes, "Oh, yeah. Okay." Yeah.
And I will be interested to see what kind of products we see at launch. I assume we'll see some, HP Streams or the low-end Dell stuff, Inspire Online, and maybe even the Surface Go 3, right? I think it would be a mistake for Microsoft to launch Windows 10X without having its own hardware to go along with it, because it doesn't. If you launch a platform and don't commit to the hardware, it sort of says that you're not committed to the platform, right? And I think their only hardware line that they can use for this is Surface Go.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen people saying, so this means 10X is going to be for ARM. I'm like, nah. So anything I've heard about 10X so far is all Intel.
Yeah.
And I've heard the ideal will be someday bring it to ARM, but I don't think they've developed it that way that it works on ARM.
Interesting. On that subject, I've heard that the reason Windows 10X wasn't coming to ARM initially was because of the Veil technology. Microsoft didn't want to virtualize Win32 x86 on top of having to virtualize the x86 technology as well. Performance was just terrible doing that, as you could probably imagine.
Yeah.
But with Vero removed, that limitation is gone. So technically, in theory, there could be Windows 10X ARM devices at launch. I've not heard of any specifically, but I have been told that if there are any, it'll be Snapdragon 7C and 8C based stuff, the low end sort of educational facing stuff.
I think that's way too early. I do.
Yeah.
So I know you and some other people say, like, the reason they didn't do Go was because of this or that. Go with ARM, and I hear the reason they haven't done things with ARM is just because ARM isn't really working with Windows, right? Like the performance is terrible. Battery life is awful, right? Like, why would you make a device with this, even though like Surface Pro X is out there and that's kind of their toe in the water on that? But I don't know. I just think they have to wait for ARM technology to get better and for them to catch up with Windows working on ARM. Like they're way behind, right?
The chips are the biggest problem. I think Qualcomm is really, compared to Apple at least, Apple have ARM processors and they're very, very good. Qualcomm, they're still working on getting performance up to par, at least on the Windows side of things.
Yeah.
I think the Surface Pro X was a great, push forward towards that. Because before that it was the Snapdragon 850 and the 835 and whatnot. Those weren't great Windows on ARM PCs. The Surface Pro X I think is the first passable one, but there is still way more room for improvement here. They're not done. They're not like, wait, we've done it, let's move on.
Right. No, and until there's real tangible benefits to move to ARM, why would you?
Yeah. I think where Microsoft needs to get is to at a point where the emulation for x86 and even 64-bit, because I am hearing that they're working on 64-bit now.
Yeah.
It needs to get to a point where the emulation doesn't matter, right? Like you don't notice a difference in emulated programs versus native ARM programs, because the nature of Windows is you're never going to get all your Windows apps running on ARM, because there's programs of that are decades old that just aren't going to update their code base to do that. And it is a shame. They're not like Apple. Apple could just heavy-handedly go, right, all developers, you have to compile for ARM, otherwise you won't be working on our computers no more. Microsoft can't do that.
No. Yeah, so I think ARM, ARM someday, I don't even know where that is on a schedule, but if they are moving to a schedule where 10X comes out once a year with a major update, I don't know if it'll be out in 2022, but I doubt 2021. Yeah. And there's so many people who say, but what about Apple? What about Apple going to ARM? Isn't this pushing them more? I always say this to people. I'm like, don't look at Microsoft through Apple colored glasses, because they have a whole different set of priorities and things going on. It's not that they're so tied to Intel. They'd love to be untied from Intel, but the things their users want to do are really different from what Apple's users expect and what they want to do. Right.
Yeah. Microsoft is obviously the enterprise focus, whereas Apple definitely isn't enterprise focused. They're more consumer, and for some reason you can bully consumers a little more and just force them to do stuff, and they just accept it apparently. At least on the Apple side.
Apple can bully anybody and get away with it because their users and the people who love them are okay with that.
Yeah.
But when in the Windows world, that doesn't fly,
It's
right?
True, yeah. So I do have a couple more questions for you regarding the scheduling of Windows 10 and whatnot. So if we're expecting them to do this sort of TikTok cycle, Windows 10, Windows 10X, that assumes that the next big feature update for Windows 10 will be in the fall of 2021, which would mean, based on the Azure development cycle, that we have 12 months maybe of development to go before the next version of Windows 10 is done. That's a long time, right, for a Windows 10 feature update at this point, because it's usually 6 months, 6 to 8 months. 12 months is a big deal. Do you think we'll see some big changes in the next big feature update for Windows 10?
No.
Well, okay.
So, do enterprise want big changes in Windows 10? No.
It's true, but then I mentioned, if you remember back in May, Panos wrote that article where he talks about reinvestment in Windows 10, using Windows to innovate and whatnot. That's phrasing and wording they haven't used in Windows for a long time. I think something's changed from how they think of Windows desktop, at least in the last 3 to 4 months, and that they're working on some interesting stuff for desktop now. Because otherwise, why would they use the term reinvestment? Because the last 4 Windows 10 updates have been in enterprise focused. What are they reinvesting in exactly? If that's already been the thing.
Maybe 10X is what he was talking about.
Yeah, maybe the blog post is a bit vague.
Because think about it, like, who's going to be, if this schedule thing that I've heard about is true, which again I don't know because nobody from Microsoft will confirm it or deny it. You know what will make enterprises super happy? That. They want one update. They don't like this twice yearly update. Most of them don't even take the spring update because they're like, you know what? I can get the 30 months of support if I wait
Yeah.
for the fall update. And I don't really want more updates. I don't want more disruption in my enterprise. And the main things they want are security improvements. So that's the area I think Microsoft is focusing heavily on is security improvements, performance improvements, some UX stuff, making it look better and more consistent. But like in terms of adding brand new gigantic features to Windows, I think those days are over.
Yeah, I mean, what more can they really add, right?
I
Like
know.
like you can only go so far before we're done.
I know, right? If they just fixed Windows, it would make a lot of people happy,
Yeah.
not just enterprises, but you, right? Like you're always complaining about the UI. Like if
Yep.
they added rounded corners, your life would be complete.
Exactly. I'm a simple man. All I need is rounded corners and Windows will be good. But on the subject of people wanting Windows to work, moving to this once a year cycle for Windows 10 and once a year for Windows 10X, at least on the Windows 10 side, it would also give Microsoft a better chance at stabilizing these updates before they go out. Because as we all know, Microsoft has been struggling quite a bit to get these updates out in a stable manner, right? Like the 2004 update that just came out in end of May, I think at least your Surface still doesn't have it, right? Because
I
of
check every
issues.
day. Nope.
And that to me is insane. If Microsoft, Surface PCs should be the first PCs that get Windows updates, in my opinion.
You would think. Yes, you would think so. So something hasn't quite worked in the way that it's rolling out, being tested, and I'm not going to completely blame Microsoft. A lot of those things in the list on their site of things that are broken are third-party drivers, and they don't like to call out their partners, right? So they're not saying, well, Intel, if you fix the graphics driver, we could roll it out, but I think that whole thing about making this more stable and predictable and quicker, like you can't underestimate how much that matters. Like more than looks and feels and new transparency or no transparency. The thing that people care about is it fast? Does it work? Is it breaking my stuff? Like those basics, which are super hard to nail, right? Those are the things people care about.
Yeah, so I really do hope Microsoft actually figures that out, because I think right now that's the biggest thing they struggle with. I think it was last year, I can't remember the name of the person who's now in charge of like the stability of Windows, or maybe John Cable, is it?
John Cable.
Yeah, so he's in charge of making sure Windows updates actually are great now, right? And I think we're still waiting to see like any real changes come to that, because 1909 was a great start. 1909, but it's not a real feature update. I don't count that as as a valid attempt. The actual feature updates so far haven't been too great.
No, they haven't. And again, I'd rather have them delay it coming to PCs, and especially my PC, if it's going to break
for sure. Yeah.
No, if I'm going to start getting blue screens or it's going to brick my device, I don't need 2004, right? But how did we get to this point where it's almost August and I still don't have it, right?
Because my issue isn't with them delaying the update. My issue is them not making sure the update is good to go on day one. Well, you don't have to delay an update if it's not announced as it doesn't have a release date, right? Why is 2004 being designated as a May release date if it's not ready? Because it's clearly not ready, right?
Right.
So I guess that's my issue with it.
Yeah.
So real quick, I just want to talk briefly about the dual screen stuff Microsoft is working on in regards to hardware. Obviously, Surface Neo, we're not expecting that until 2022 now. Do you expect any changes to the hardware, since the delay is quite a bit?
I would say yes. Right?
I would hope so, right?
Even when I first wrote about them delaying the Neo, and everybody's like, oh, so when do you think the Neo will come out? I said, I don't think the Neo will come out. I think Neo Plus Plus or Neo 2 or whatever they're going to do to it is what you'll see whenever this comes to market. And why would you come out with it before the operating system's ready? Like some people are like, well, why can't they roll the Neo out with 10X the first iteration? I'm like, because it's a dual screen device.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it'll be something that is better than what Neo was going to be if it debuted this year. It might even look a little different. It'll have new features that probably wouldn't have made it into the Neo. I don't know what those are, but I think they'll still try to do a dual screen device in the Surface family running 10X, but I don't think it'll be the thing we saw last October.
Yeah, I would be surprised, because one of the big complaints people had with the hardware was the bezels were too thick,
right?
All of that sort of stuff. I assume they'll update the processor in it as well a little bit, maybe a newer Intel Lakeville processor at the time of release. But yeah, I will be really interested to see what changes on the hardware front, because I would be shocked if Surface Neo, as we know it, ships in 2022. About, God, really?
Yeah. No, that would be terrible, right?
Yeah.
Because the market moves really fast, and other companies will be rolling out dual screen devices, so Microsoft will be looking at those, and customers will be looking at those, and you want to have something that is as good, if not better, by the time you roll out the hardware.
Yeah. That said, Microsoft is known for shipping Surface hardware with last generation specs.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I know.
Which leads us nicely into the Duo, which which is apparently coming very soon, I'm hearing. I just want to know, what are your thoughts on the Duo?
So, you know much more about the Duo than I know. In fact, I bet you have one there. Do you?
No, I don't.
I just made you spit out your tea. Okay, so I'm interested in seeing it. I mean, I saw it in October when we saw it at the launch. We've seen it in pictures and videos of various Microsoft execs like Brad Anderson and Panos, flailing it about, showing us that they have
marketing,
it. Yeah. I'm intrigued. I'm an Android user, so the fact it runs Android doesn't bother me at all. I like the idea of a smaller, lighter, more portable device. The lack of a good camera is very worrisome to me. I know you guys at Windows Central have made the case that maybe it doesn't need the best camera, but if it doesn't have a good camera, now I'm carrying 3 devices, and that's one too many.
Yeah, I agree.
Right?
So my thing about this has been Duo V1 focuses on the form factor before being a good phone.
Yeah.
It is a phone. It can do phone stuff, but Microsoft really isn't. That wasn't its focus for Duo V1, right. I think. Right? I think they're trying to nail the form factor and try to get to sell that idea to people. Like dual screens is better than a single foldable screen, because Microsoft honestly believes this. I know a lot of us have been like, okay, whatever, Microsoft, but I believe they've actually done research internally which suggests that what they're saying is right. I don't know if that's a thing or not, but they seem to really believe it. So I think that's what they're pushing for Duo V1, and then with Duo V2, if we get there, that's when we'll start seeing a better camera, more consumer-facing phone features that you would want to see in a flagship device that costs an exceptional amount of money, right? I think just for Duo V1, it's going to be, for diehard fans like me, I guess, and
premium
developers.
Device, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to be cheap. It's got 2 glass screens. I mean, it's going to be expensive.
Yeah,
right?
Even with last gen specs. So I'm hearing it's like an 855, 6 gigs of RAM, 11 megapixel single camera. Like, even if the 11 megapixel camera is good, it won't be able to compete with the other flagships that have multiple camera sensors that can do ultra wide and macros photo. Yeah. It's just not going to happen.
Their biggest mistake, and this is just me being a normal person critiquing this, when they showed the Duo at the October launch, they never should have made the first thing they showed with it. It's the woman answering a phone call, right? Because they wanted to make a big deal of it. It's not a phone. It's a dual screen productivity device. Okay, so why did you show her answering a phone call as the first thing that you showed? Because if you said to me, this is a dual screen productivity device, it's for note taking, it's for you being able to have a larger screen estate when you're looking at your email, it's for being able to do all this and that with OneNote or this with To Do, I might have bought into it, but instead you showed it as a phone. And so everybody who writes about it calls it a phone.
Yeah,
right?
I think I know why they did that, though, because if they hadn't demoed any phone features on stage and stuff, the first question people will ask when Microsoft finishes their pitch for it will be, does it make phone calls? That would be the first question. So I think they're just trying to get out of the way. Like, yes, it makes phone calls. Let's move on and talk about other things.
No, Panos, ultimate showman. He shows the whole Duo, right? And then he says, and one more thing. And then he has a phone call. Like, that's how you do that, right? Just make it like an afterthought. Like, it does all these cool things. And you could, if you want to use it to answer a phone call, you can.
Yeah. The Duo is going to be interesting. So I am hearing it's coming sometime this summer. So hopefully before the end of September.
So do you think the reason they're doing it in the summer is because of back to school?
No, I think they're doing it because they need to get it out now. Otherwise, it's because I think with PCs they can get away with shipping with last gen specs. In the smartphone space, it's a different game. With an 855, if this was coming in holiday 2020 without 5G, without wireless charging, apparently without NFC as well, that's a no-go for even most fans, I think. Right. So they're trying to get out sooner rather than later, so they can say, right, it's out, you can buy it, and then forget about it and move on to Duo 2 next year.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Because the first group of people who will buy this are the total fans,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
The Windows Phone holdouts who are like, oh, yay, I can say I'm using, oh, well, it's not Windows, but it's a Microsoft phone,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah, I mean, I'm going to buy one for sure to review because I'm sure I won't get one for review. But, if it's good, I'll keep it. When I bought the Surface Go to review it, the first generation, I'm like, I'm never going to keep this thing. And I ended up keeping it.
Oh, nice.
So,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'd love to see you review the Duo because I
yeah,
love
I would
your
like to.
insight into the Surface hardware. Because for ages, you couldn't get like you didn't like the Surface line. I mean, although I agree with the Surface Pro, I do not think the Surface Pro form factor is an intuitive or good form factor.
Either.
I think it's
No,
rubbish. The Surface laptop, I think, is much better. In fact, I
I,
think it's great, the Surface laptop.
yeah,
But the Pro line, I don't know why it's the most successful product
I
in
know.
Surface. It's just I hate the form factor.
You know what? It's because we're not the audience, right?
Yeah.
What's great for salespeople who are on the road, executives who need to like do one line of email response to somebody, but want to be able to see full screen size all their email. It's not for people like us who use it as a full-time 24/7 productivity device. It's not good for that. I don't
Yeah,
think.
no, me neither. And it doesn't fit on my lap, so.
Oh, that's obvious, but okay.
Yeah.
I see so many people still like saying I can use it on my lap. I'm like, okay, I'd like to see you use it for like 4 hours and write 3 stories. Like that's my day. Let's see you do that, right?
Yeah. Well, Mary Jo, thank you so much for coming on the
Yeah,
podcast
thanks,
once
Zach.
again. Hopefully, we can make this a yearly thing. Every July, you just come on and talk
Be
about
fun.
whatever's happening in the world of
Whatever
Microsoft.
wherever devices are out or
Yeah.
new operating systems or Microsoft Linux, Microsoft Android, who knows,
Yeah. Of course, you can follow Mary Jo Foley on Twitter. Your handle's at Mary Jo Foley, right?
It
Just spell
is.
out. And then you can also find Mary Jo's work at allaboutmicrosoft.com. Is there anywhere else you want to plug, or is that everything?
Can I plug my podcast?
Oh, absolutely. Go ahead.
So if you don't know about it, there's another Windows podcast in addition to the Windows Central podcast. It's called Windows Weekly on the Twit Network, and we record on Wednesdays, and our show's usually out late that day.
Excellent. Mary Jo, thank you so much. Always a pleasure having you on.
Thanks, Zach. Same.
Oh, my mic was muted. There we go. So that was Mary Jo on the Windows Central podcast. Always a pleasure having her on. Dan, I am interested in your thoughts on the cloud PC stuff.
Wrong.
Nice.
By my Trumpism there. Yeah, no, I mean the cloud stuff. It's a really interesting discussion. I'm biased in the sense that I'm mostly interested in technology from the perspective of what's coming next, looking down the road. And for me, the idea of cloud, remote, and all this, running apps, through the cloud to a device. I know a lot of this seems like, oh, it's so far off, and like, we're just getting 4G to be good now, and people are talking 5G. But really, these companies need to plan out for that future. And we talked about that last week. Like when computers were first getting big, they didn't do much. They played a couple of video games. You ran spreadsheets on it. But the home personal computer, did not become interesting, did not take off until the internet, once things became connected. And even then, it was a slow burn, right? You had dial-up modems, and then it was finally people started getting physical wired connectors. Now it's like a big deal, but it's still, the infrastructure is still an issue. So I feel like, this is the future. I was just using my Pro X, setting it up. And I just really like this idea of always connected computing and streaming stuff, making up for the fact, even ARM has its drawbacks. So I don't know. I think it's kind of good. But yeah, that was a fun discussion.
For sure, yeah. I think streaming apps could also open a gateway. You know how like xCloud is making gaming accessible to a much wider audience. I think app streaming could make like heavy, like professional grade tools more accessible to a wider audience.
Sure.
Like you could edit a 4K video in Premiere Pro using app streaming on a Surface Pro X. Of course,
Right.
maybe you want to do color like editing stuff, but you could do like stuff like that. You could work in Photoshop if you wanted to. You could compile an app using Visual Studio on a Surface Pro X using app streaming, and it would, if the app is hosted on a PC with an i7 or an i9 with like epic specs, there's no problem, right? Like all of that processing is happening off device, so you didn't have to worry about it on the Surface Pro X.
And that's why I've been advocating and saying for a while the industry is shifting to this idea of like we're getting these massive, super powerful workstation laptops. I have here on my floor, of course. The new Razer Blade Pro 17, which I should have the review out sometime next week. Massive laptop. I mean, it's not really big. I mean, comparatively, compared to years ago, this is like a 15-inch laptop now. It's like, but it's super powerful, like really good GPU in it, powerful CPU, 4K display. Like, but not everybody needs that. Some people really do need that, though, whether it's going to be for gaming or for a lot of people buy the Blades for video editing and where you just need that power right then and there. But for a large segment of the populace, this idea of like carrying around a thin, light device that can also do a lot of that heavy processing, like you said, streaming remotely. I know it seems like, something that's so far away, but I'm telling you, this stuff is getting really close, and that's the goal, is to make that. So eventually, yeah, we do have these, thin, light devices that can still do the things we need them to do, but it's going to be, always connected. We still got a while to go before the infrastructure is there, but that is the logical end of where everything is being pushed towards. And so even if you're like, you see this stuff and you're like, it's not for me, I need, an XPS 15 today, that's fine. But let's talk about, what Microsoft's looking at is, where is PC computing in 2 years, 5 years, and 10 years? Because they really have to think about that and build out for that world. So when we talk a lot about this stuff, we are talking about things that are 5, 10 years out, but it doesn't mean it's any less important.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for it. So we're hearing, Mary Jo's hearing spring 2021 for the cloud PC stuff, and I'm hearing with Windows 10X launching without Win32 local support, this is the service that consumers and people will be able to use to get those legacy apps back on Windows 10X, which I think is the correct approach, especially for these low-end PCs.
I do take issue, though, with her assessment of ARM. Although I'm willing to concede that ARM is probably not a huge priority for Microsoft, or rather, it's not where they want it to be. And the consumers haven't been buying it. Like, I concede all that stuff. For me, though, like, I've been using the Pro X while, we're listening to the Mary Jo talk. I still love that laptop. It's my favorite device I use, and it's even better now with this beta build of Windows 10. I'm really enjoying it. I still think ARM has a lot of potential, but there is a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah.
Oh, we didn't even talk about that this week. We'll do that quickly. The Teams. So Microsoft Teams runs on the Surface Pro X and Windows on ARM, but it's not compiled for ARM, meaning it runs in emulation. It runs Electron. So it runs. It's just that the performance is not as good as it should be. Where is Microsoft on this and making Teams compatible? Well, the corporate vice president who is in charge of engineering on Teams responded to a question on Twitter this week. It said, yes, an ARM compiled version is in the works. I don't have a time frame, of course, but it is on the roadmap. And I made an article about that only because that's the first time Microsoft has publicly stated that they were even going to commit to making Teams ARM compatible, or optimized, I should say. And I think it's a big deal. But it does, I went off and put an editorial up about this, about how infuriating it is. It's like Electron was recompiled for ARM, and it was actually done late last summer, but it kind of came out in November as official. So it's been out there for a while, and Microsoft is just dragging their feet, in my opinion. Now, there's a lot of technical issues that need to be solved. I get that. This stuff isn't easy. But even stuff like with the game streaming, we're not sure. The new Xbox app I've put in the article isn't compatible right now with ARM. And Microsoft just doesn't seem to be, they haven't really explained the vision on this. They don't seem to be driving all their teams to be like, listen, you come out with a new app? Cool. Does it run on our ARM devices too? It doesn't seem to be a priority. Instead, what happens is these teams are like, we're going to make the best app for our team. It gives us the best opportunity to make the best product. And that's all they think about. They don't think about the larger company vision. And I find that really infuriating. I'm glad Teams evidently will come out for an ARM compiled version sometime in the future. I just wish, it's been years now. ARM was first announced in 2017. It's been, a couple of years now. It's like, come on, guys. Like, and then Skype went to Electron. It's the same issue. Like, I don't know. This stuff's all over the place. So.
this may be tied to something I heard a while ago now. Apparently, Microsoft is working on a React Native version of the Microsoft Teams app, which would be huge for performance. Because right now it's
That'd be great.
Electron based. I haven't been able to confirm that. That was I just heard that in an offhand comment.
And that would follow sort of what the Xbox app.
Yeah,
did.
right.
It was Electron and went to React Native.
I feel like internally that app is used as a demonstration as to why you should move away from Electron, because it's a success story for React Native and overall UWP app performance, because
and Microsoft. Oh, sorry. Go.
The Xbox Electron app was a dog. It was RAM heavy. It was slow. Whereas the React Native version, which is what's going to ship, is so much better.
Yeah, and I think React Native is a technology that Microsoft is definitely, they talk a lot about it. It seems to be a lot of priority on it, and they're encouraging it a lot. So that wouldn't surprise me at all. I'd be very excited if Teams goes to React Native. That'd be pretty nice. I guess we should also mention that ARM itself, the holding company that designs all the chips, that is later then licensed to like companies like Qualcomm and even Apple, they are up for sale apparently, and then the question is who's going to buy them. I know a lot of people in our audience, it's like, well, Microsoft should buy them. I don't think so. I'm not really confident a lot of times when Microsoft buys big companies, but I also feel like that would cause a conflict of interest. I mean, if you're Microsoft and you own ARM holdings and you still got to work with Intel and AMD, I feel like that could cause some conflict. But that doesn't mean I want Apple or Google to own them either, because I think the same reasons. That said, it sounds like NVIDIA may be interested in buying it, which I think NVIDIA buying them would make sense, and I think everybody would be happy with NVIDIA. It's like a neutral party. Everybody's like, oh, okay, it's NVIDIA. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there, though. But I don't think Microsoft's going to buy them.
We should wrap up the podcast. This might be our longest episode yet.
2 hours, yes.
That's a record.
Oh, well, let's do some Q&A. So if you guys are in the chat room right now, you can start firing off your questions. If you're listening to this recorded, however, this is where it ends. Sorry about that. But you can always join us on Fridays at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time at YouTube, our Windows Central channel, and we'll be broadcasting live there. You can also see our previous broadcasts there as well. Other than that, though, you can follow me on Twitter, Daniel_Rubino, Rubino, and follow Zach at ZACBOWDEN, and we can take some of your questions and comments there as well. Other than that, stay safe, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care, everyone.
Nice. I've never seen Voice Recorder save a 2-hour file before, so let's see if it actually does it.
Yeah. It's like a race.
So question time. Someone's already asking, if React Native is that good, why did Skype move to Electron? Because Skype sucks. I hate Skype.
The Skype team is just weird.
Yeah.
I don't know. They just, whatever is popular, they do the opposite of. That's what it feels like.
Any info about its Surface Pro and when it would release? Probably October, if there is one this year. Will Microsoft include shimmed versions of Edge and Office Win32 apps on Windows 10X? Doesn't shimming eliminate the need for Veil? Yes. So Edge will still be on Windows 10X because Edge doesn't require Veil to operate. It operates via a shim. Office Win32, I don't know. As far as I'm aware, no. I think Edge is the only app that can do that can operate outside of a container on Windows 10X. So I think what Microsoft is doing on 10X is pushing the Office web apps instead. Microsoft is going in big on the web with Windows 10X. So Mail, Calendar, all the Office suite. I think they will all be web-based, or at least React Native, which is built on the web versions of the apps.
Do you see the free consumer teams replacing GroupMe completely? No. I feel like it's very different. I mean, don't get me wrong, Teams and the new Teams consumer stuff is slowly trickling out on iOS and Android. It's neat. It's definitely way more involved than GroupMe. And GroupMe is like, what makes GroupMe so fun is its simplicity. It's really to the point. Teams is definitely more powerful, and for some groups who use GroupMe, switching to Teams could make sense. But I think it's a little bit of a process to do so. Type cover for Duo, I don't think so. I feel like it's too small of a keyboard. They would have to.
I don't think Surface Mini had one either.
Yeah.
That was an 8-inch device.
Do we know when the gray Surface Buds are due to come out? No, but at this pace, I'd say there's two possibilities. Surface Duo goes on sale with that. Maybe even, I still wouldn't be shocked if Microsoft tosses in a pair of Surface earbuds with Surface Duo. Distinct possibility. If not, then October, when they have what we expect to be their annual October Surface events. And it would just be, I don't think it'd make a big deal of it. They'll just pick, oh, there's a new color out there.
I don't understand the difference between the difference in a virtual machine and cloud PC that we're discussing. A virtual machine, well, even with cloud PC, it will still be a VM. It just will be hosted in the cloud. I assume what you're referring to is a local virtual machine versus a cloud-based virtual machine. A virtual machine, in the context you're talking about, would be on device. So whatever you're doing within that virtual machine will be limited to the processing power you have, which isn't great on a low-cost PC or like an ARM-based device like the Surface Pro X. It being in the cloud means that VM can be a native Intel Core i5 or an Intel Core i7, a beast of a PC, and you can do lots of rendering and processing in the cloud using that Win32 program that's installed on Cloud PC without affecting the processing limitations you have on your local device. That's the difference between a local virtual machine and using Cloud PC.
Dan, did you ever mail out those "We Want You" t-shirts from the contest in March?
Did you?
I did not.
Oh, that's a Daniel.
Look, I don't get out much. I'm looking at the box.
I mean, there was a pandemic. I mean, we can.
Yeah, I still have them. I'm going to try to make a conscious effort to do that this weekend. My apologies. I'm really bad at mailing stuff out, but the fact that I have a shirt on. I mean, I went 2 days without a shower this week. Like, it's pretty bad. Like, I get out like maybe once a week. So, no, but I still owe you guys the winners of that.
The Cloud PC that we've discussed, won't that mean paying double licensing, one for the local OS and then one for the Cloud PC? Well, we don't know how licensing will work for this. That Microsoft may be building a very stripped back version of Windows 10, which has different licensing rules and whatnot for this service. I have a feeling it will just be part of Microsoft 365. If you're subscribed to Microsoft 365, you get access to Cloud PC. It may even use your OneDrive storage. You know, if you have Office 365, you have a terabyte of storage. That terabyte can also be used for these programs that you install in the cloud. I don't think you'll have to pay double Windows licenses. Microsoft could easily circumvent that based on subscription.
Thoughts on the fourth quarter earnings from Microsoft? Good question. It was kind of what we opened up the podcast with. We had a pretty extensive discussion. So
yeah, just scroll back to the beginning.
Yeah, so you can go listen to that later.
We also talked about the game showcase. Scroll back.
Yep. And what are your thoughts on NBA and teams with together mode? Also talked about that at the beginning of the podcast. So.
Were you guys even here for the podcast? What's going on?
Well, it was a long one. What are your thoughts on AMD taking over Intel and share price today after Intel's announcement of delaying 7-nanometer chips? I mean, I kind of don't care about the stock price. I don't own stock in any of these companies, unfortunately. That said, this is AMD's opportunity. This is no different than how Microsoft the only reason Internet Explorer became good and popular, I know everybody wants to say it was because they built it into Windows, but it was actually because Netscape dropped the ball and just wasn't releasing good products, and Microsoft just did a better job. And sometimes that's how Microsoft succeeds is something else fails. And that's kind of the case here. And I think AMD's making really good products. Like, they started making good desktop chips finally again, like around 2017. And that's been established. They haven't made a good laptop processor until about May of this year, which is the new Ryzen series. And the Ryzen series is good. It's not amazing. Like, they still run hot, but it's clearly a big jump. So this is their opportunity to really kind of take over. Not so much because their product is so much better than Intel. I'd say it's hit and miss. Some things are better, some things it's not. But because Intel is sort of keeps tripping on their own feet here, it's also an opportunity for Qualcomm, to sort of step in here as well. So I'm I'm excited for companies being able to leverage and take advantage of the situation. And hopefully, I hope they do. We still need to see, though, Intel has been a key partner for a lot of PC manufacturers in designing these laptops. I talked about that before, the XPS line. I'm pretty positive Intel plays a big role in the design of them. And that's why you don't, like, when people are like, why don't they just put the AMD chips in the XPS? It's because Intel kind of helped develop a lot of your laptops that are out there. And so they can't kind of just swap out the chips. So what we really need to see is a lot of these high-end premium devices. We need to see something there with AMD being co-developing. So it's still going to be a little while before we see that. Right now, we're seeing a lot of, here's an Intel laptop, and we swapped it out and threw an AMD chip in there too, which is fine, but it's not as amazing. We're also not seeing a lot of these Ryzen chips in what I would call the premium Ultrabook line, which is Intel's bread and butter right now. So until that happens, but it's good. Lately, Intel stuff is also running hot. They keep increasing voltages. Yeah, a little bit here and there, but I've been very happy with the 10th gen stuff. Very happy with it. It doesn't run as hot or as bad as 8th gen. So I'm not as harsh on the 10th gen. I think the cooling is actually still, in my opinion, better than AMD's Ryzen. Ryzen can get pretty hot. Did you see Tom's Hardware reviewing the Samsung Lakefield laptop on YouTube? It looks like it's really optimized for 10X rather than 10. I didn't get to see that. I'm not Lakefield's. I don't know. It sounds theoretically amazing. I'm skeptical. Anytime Intel starts to make low wattage, super optimized mobile solutions, they just never been amazing. I'd like to think Lakefield is going to be different, but I'm not convinced of that yet.
On Mixer, the recording for the show continued through to the end of the Q&A, and I could come back later and view the entire recording, including the Q&A. You can do the same on YouTube. It's hidden from our video uploads page, but if you go to our playlists area on our YouTube channel, there's a Windows Central Podcasts playlist, and the entire video on demand, including the Q&A, is available to watch there every week. The reason we hide it is because we don't upload enough to offset the amount of podcasts we do. So it just looks better if we hide them from the video upload page.
Zach, you mentioned about the cool new internal sounds in Windows 10X. It would be great if you could play out one or two here.
Give me a sec. Got to find them first.
Also, Zach, do you think Halo will get a BR mode?
No, I think 323 have already said that they're not interested. So here's the default one on Windows 10. Dan won't be able to hear this, but I think everybody else will. That's the sound we all know. That's a typical sound on Windows 10. Then there's this one on Windows 10X. There you go. Sounds kind of similar, but way more rounded. It's like rounded corners on sounds. Device connect. Sounds kind of nice. Device disconnect. Device connection error. I should stop talking over them, to be honest. There's the connection error. There's... Give me a sec. There's a couple more here that are noteworthy. There's new message notification. There's notification mail. Notification toast. And a bunch of others. But you get the idea. Low battery. They have a whole bunch of new sounds. And they sound nice.
I haven't heard them, so I don't know.
I'll do a video next week. So,
do you think any features now in the beta channel could be removed anytime before 20H2 launch, or do you think those features will definitely be there? I think they'll definitely be there, with the exception of if there's obviously anything that causes such a catastrophic failure that they have to remove it and can't fix it. But correct me if I'm wrong, Zach, most of the stuff that appears in the beta is stuff that's basically locked in for features, and it's just now final testing.
As you mentioned, unless there's a last minute bug that they didn't know about, which for the the small stuff that's in 20H2, I don't
For
think
the
that's gonna
UI
happen.
stuff.
Yeah,
it probably won't.
I think we're good. I know reviews of certain products are done occasionally on this podcast, but is there any consideration about doing picks and tips of the week, like how Windows Weekly uses? No, we've not really thought about that. I mean, that's a Windows Weekly thing, right? We don't even copy Windows Weekly.
Let's copy them.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked about that in the past about doing just general pop culture things, shows we're watching, movies we saw, devices we like, apps that intrigued us. I mean, we can kind of try to do something like that and have it just kind of general, whatever.
Towards the end, yeah.
Yeah.
We like to
What
try and
watch
keep
I bought
these.
this.
We like to try and keep these podcasts short. We like an hour to an hour and a half at most. Today's was an exception, of course, but we're usually no longer than an hour and a half because people get bored. When should we expect a Studio 3? I'm hearing it could be in the fall of this year, October, November time.
That would make sense.
All right, couple more questions, and I think it's time to head off. It's almost 10 p.m. here.
Will Xbox Game Pass be available for other platforms and devices? Well, only in the sense that if you have Game Pass, you're going to get cloud streaming, Project X Cloud, and you can use that on your Android and iOS device. So that's how it'll work. I don't see them going into, I don't know how else it would work, because I don't know how you get like an Xbox or PC game onto an iPad. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't think they're going to start making iPad games, you know.
How can I clean my Windows 10 computer for free? I assume in regards to... Yeah, yeah, throw it in the bathtub, bit of soap, scrub it down, good to go. In regards to software, you go into settings and go to system, go down to storage, and there's a whole bunch of different things in there you can sort of check in and delete. You can also uninstall programs, that helps. And that's basically it, really. Reinstall Windows if your install is that messy. Also, don't throw your computer in the bath. That was a joke. We're not being held responsible for anyone doing that.
Project X Cloud on TV. There's been no mention of it. We've heard nothing to suggest it's happening. That said, it's such a new platform technology thing. It's really too early. I could definitely envision Microsoft teaming up with Samsung to preload xCloud onto Samsung TVs. Whether that's going to happen, if they've had those discussions, what are the technical challenges there, I'm not sure. But possibly, why not? I think right now they want to get it out for, the PC version and the phones, stuff like that, and go from there, see how well it's received.
I think there was a rumor this week that, not in regards to TVs, but in least regards to the Galaxy Note 20, it's certified for xCloud or something, which I guess means the app will be pre-installed. I don't know. Any plans to cover pro features like Windows containers, Windows subsystem for Linux, and Sandbox? We've covered Windows Sandbox before. We've talked about containers in the context of Veil and Win32 and whatnot. We're not going to cover Windows subsystem for Linux because I don't care about Linux. It's the truth to that answer. We are not the podcast for Linux-based stuff. I know Microsoft loves Linux these days. That's fine. They also love Azure, and we don't talk about Azure that much on this podcast either.
Yes, I was saying Xbox app on Apple TV. I don't know. I mean, Apple's pretty,
they'll want to cut.
Like
the reason why xCloud isn't launching on iPhone is because Apple wants to cut, and it's just not going to happen.
Right. I would like to see xCloud for my Tesla.
That'd be pretty great. How fast is the internet in your Tesla?
So it gets LTE. And then
do you have to pay for that?
It depends when you bought it. For some people, it's actually been included. I believe it's $10 a month right now.
Oh, okay.
But that's not just for internet. That's also for the mapping, Spotify premium thing, because you need to have that to use the Spotify. You need a Spotify premium account, like
Yeah.
Yeah, so they could do it. Like they really could. It would work. Not necessarily over LTE, but they could have it working over Wi-Fi. Because the idea is, when you go to Tesla stations, they're supposed to have Wi-Fi, where you can watch Hulu, you can watch YouTube, Netflix, and you would presumably be able to use xCloud.
Daniel, how do you get booked for TV interviews? The people need to see you with the Surface Buzz on TV.
I'm actually going to be on TD Ameritrade Tuesday at 1:45 p.m. talking about AMD. So that's TV-ish. I haven't had too many TV stuff. I used to do Fox Business a lot, but with the pandemic, I don't know, it hasn't been as a priority. It seems like
TV doesn't matter no more.
Yeah. But if you want, you can see me on TD Ameritrade. They're pretty cool. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's pretty much it. I think we're done for today. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back next Friday. As always, follow us on Twitter. We'll keep you updated on when we're going live and all of that good stuff. But until then, we will see you next time.
Bye.